Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the Mobile Home Park Rental Review Board meeting. Um, I am the chairperson this evening, Maria Horton, and let me see if I can find, we are going to call this meeting to order. And may I ask you to all stand and do the Pledge of Allegiance, please? Right behind me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Okay, may we have roll call, please?
Chairperson Roberson is absent. Board Member Valdez.
Here.
Board Member King.
Present.
Board Member Gonzalez.
Here.
Board Member Forbath. Absent. Board Member Ziskowski. Absent. Board Member Clark Harris.
Here.
Board Member Muhammad. Absent. Board Member Hayes. Here. Board Member Perez. Present. Board Member Davis.
Here.
Board Member Richardson.
Present.
Board Member Horton.
Present.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
Point of order, Chairperson. Did we have any communication for Mr. Roberson or Ms. Forbath that they were not going to be making it this evening?
Yes, neither will be making.
Okay, I'd like to make a motion that they be excused from this evening's meeting.
Okay. Do we need a vote on that? Okay. We don't. Okay, so we just need a show of hands or, okay. Okay, can we have a show of hands to excuse those who are not present with us this evening that called in? All in agreement? Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, at this point, do we have any public oral communications for matters not listed on the agenda? Yes.
I apologize, but we do not have our chair, so we need to have a chair for this meeting.
I am a vice chair.
Okay. Thank you. Other commissions, we need to appoint someone as chair. But
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. So do we have any public oral communications for matters not listed on the agenda? The public may at this time address the members of the Mobile Home Park Rental Review Board on any matters within the jurisdiction of the board. No action may be taken on non-agendized items except as authorized by law. Speakers are requested to limit their comments to no more than 3 minutes each, speaking once.
I'm not sure if we have any speakers here, but we just wanted to address, we do have an upcoming public hearing that will likely be in December regarding the Rancho Dominguez Mobile Home Park. A fair return application was submitted. Unfortunately, once an application is submitted, we are not allowed to hear any testimony or receive information, or board members aren't to communicate directly with the park owner or the residents until the actual hearing. So we just ask if there's any public that is here tonight to speak on that matter. We are not able to receive that information tonight. However, there will be a notice that is sent to all of the residents where you can submit written evidence, testimony. You can also come to the hearing. You'll have a notice and speak directly to the board on the matter on that night. But today we cannot hear any of that information.
If there is anything else that you would like to speak about, anything that is not on the agenda and that is not for that particular meeting for Rancho Dominguez, if you would like to speak, you are certainly welcome to at this time. Yes. Is she going to speak? come forward. Okay.
I speak Spanish, so I can translate for her. Um, Socorro, hoy is blinking. There we go. Okay. So, hoy la plática no va a ser nada de Parque de Rancho Domínguez. Eso se va a poder hablar en diciembre. So, si hay otras cosas que quiere decir hoy, ah, de menos de lo que de parque. Okay. So she said that in this case, since they were not able to speak on the park, then she will wait for her time. But she does want to say that the park is having problems with the homeless coming around, in and out around their park.
Okay, could you let her know that the hearing will be, there will be a notice of public hearing sent out. It'll probably be in December, and that there will be a 30-day public comment period before that for them to submit all their concerns. But tonight is not the night for us to hear about Rancho Dominguez fair return hearing or the other issues related to that.
So, está diciendo que hoy no se puede hablar nada de que pertenece con el parque de rancho. Les van a dar una nota en 20 días para platicar de eso en vivo. También les van a mandar otra nota adelantado para cuando puedan a ustedes hablar de lo que está pasando en su parque en diciembre.
Muy bien. Entonces esperaremos a recibir la noticia y esperemos que sea para bien. Nosotros somos gente de bajos recursos y nos quieren aumentar mucho. Ok, muchas gracias.
Okay, thank you, gracias. So she says, then that's fine, they'll wait, but it's just that she'll speak about it later because it is a total increase. Okay, gracias, señora.
Is there anyone else who has something they would like to speak of? Because otherwise we will continue with the meeting.
¿Tienen otras preguntas antes que empiecen? Algo que no pertenece de parque.
No. Okay. Gracias a todos. Sí, no tienen que estar aquí por esto, porque van a esperar hasta su junta en diciembre. Yeah, yes. Gracias a ustedes. Gracias que vinieron.
Buenas noches.
Sí. Okay, let's continue with the meeting at this point. We have minutes of the meeting from January 25th.
We don't have printouts of those tonight, so we're going to move that to the next meeting if that is all right with you all.
That's fine with me. Do we want to take a vote on it, or are we okay with just moving ahead?
I believe we're okay with just moving.
Yes,
ahead.
that's fine. So then we have, the next item is the consent calendar. Are there any items? There are states that there are none. So continued unfinished business, we have none. Public hearing, we have none. New business. Let's get to Mobile Home Park Rental Review Board training. Yes.
You're doing really good.
It's on and off. Got it. Well, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Welcome to training. It feels weird. Usually I'm over there, but today I'm over here. So. And then Dominique and Ben will also have some roles. But before we jump too far in, some of you may know who I am already. Some of you may have seen my name is on most of the Mrrb stuff. So I'm Tara Matthews, and I kind of laugh, I'm interim housing staff for the Mobile Home Rent Review Board. I've been interim, I believe. My son was 1 and he is now 9, so for 8 years. My firm RSG, we review all of the petitions and applications that come in and then help prepare all the staff reports for the board and help staff the board. Tonight we also have Dominique Clark. She is with RSG as well. So you will see emails from Dominique Clark as well. And then we have Ben Jones, who is Assistant City Attorney. That is our go-to for all legal things, and he reviews all the things. Yes. So today, the 3 of us will be going through a presentation with you, and you also have a manual that Sandy prepared that are beautifully comb-bound for you all and much smaller than our previous binders that we had. So you'll be leaving with that material today as well. So we have broken the presentation today down into 6 different parts. So we're going to talk first about the mobile home space rent control ordinance in Carson. We're going to talk a little bit about the Mobile Home Rent Review Board, what your roles and responsibilities are, all the cheat sheet things so that you can make sure that you're prepared for the meetings. We're going to walk through the 3 types of rent increases that are permitted under the ordinance. Dominique is going to go into a lot of detail on fair return and capital rent increases. There's a lot of math involved. Don't worry, we do all of the math, but we just like to walk the board through that so you kind of understand how it works. And then we will kind of end towards the public hearing. So as you heard earlier, we are anticipating a public hearing likely before the end of the year. So tonight we are here to prep everybody for that upcoming hearing. And at the very end, there's just a slide that there's contact information. We also have Sandy Solis, who is our secretary. So the 4 of us, all of our information is on that. So if you ever have any questions about anything, you know how to get a hold of us. And then I'm going to kind of pause at each section for questions. So if you can kind of wait until we get to the end of the section, if there's any questions about that section, we're happy to answer them, but that way we can kind of move through the presentation. All right, let's start with the ordinance. So this ordinance has actually been in place for quite some time. It was adopted in 1979, and it was most recently amended in 2019 to include a consumer price index, rent application process that we'll talk about a little bit later. There are 20 mobile home parks that are governed by the ordinance. Some of you may remember this used to be 21, but there was a recent park closure. So that list now is 20 mobile home parks. And board members that have previously been here, please make sure you're using the new materials because everything has been updated in your training manuals to reflect the 20 parks that are still within the ordinance. Under state law and within the city's ordinance, it's really important that rent increase of the ordinances allow for the owner to receive a fair return on their investment. Yes.
What page are you on?
That one.
So just a slide, so it's not in the book.
Yes.
What page?
Oh yeah, it's not in the. You don't have the
In the training
PowerPoint in.
manual.
Yes.
No worries.
Yeah. We'll see. Yes. Yeah.
That's fine. No worries.
All right. Sorry. I was like, I'm very confused. I'm all that one.
Yeah, I can just see everybody turning their pages because they were looking.
Oh, looking for.
No worries. No worries. It's
Okay. Sorry about that. As I was mentioning, it's really important that under the rent control ordinance that it allow for a park owner to receive a fair return on their investment. This is actually a state of California constitutional right. So every rent control ordinance in the state of California that exists has to have this provision within it. In addition to the ordinance, you'll see in your training manuals that there are guidelines to the ordinance. And so these were adopted by the board to kind of help administer the rent control ordinance. It actually has a little bit more meat in it, probably more of the stuff that you all would be looking at as far as like what definitions of certain things are. So I would definitely get familiar with both the ordinance and the guidelines, but the guidelines has a lot of really good information. The ordinance has more like time frames and administerial things that the four of us make sure that we're all adhering to. And this is a section that's all about you. So the Mobile Home Park Rental Review Board. So the board is made up of 7 members. There's 2 park residents, 2 park owners, and 3 members at large. And so the members at large are just community members that don't work in the mobile home park industry or do not live within a mobile home park. And so there's 7 regular members. There are also, when we have a fully, I would say, staffed board, there are also 8 alternates. So these are individuals that step in when the regular members are unable to attend the meeting. So we have 2 alternate park resident members, 2 alternate park owner representatives, and 4 alternate at-large representatives as well. So sometimes you'll see there will be a mix of individuals on the dais for various hearings depending on board member availability to participate in a meeting. So all board members are appointed by the mayor. Again, we don't have anything to do with that process. So for those that are interested, that's all a process which you guys went through. So I'm sure you're familiar through the city clerk's office. And they're 2-year terms. So your term, if you're recently appointed, is for 2 years. And they expire on April 30th of that second year. And even if your term has expired, you're still in place until a new member has been appointed to your position. Yes, Mr. King.
I believe this reflects previous dates when the election with the April 30th in odd-numbered years.
Does city council has made some changes to that? We can update that and send that out.
Oh, okay. Because I know in the past, like currently listed, they all expire
At the same time?
during the elections,
Okay.
right after the elections. So it used to be when the elections were in March, before the city aligned them with the other elections. And that was one of the changes that we had to make with the expiration of our terms. So,
Okay.
and it was even numbered years.
Okay, we'll take a look at that and then update it before we send you a copy of the presentation. Thanks, Tom. So regular board meetings are held as needed, but the dates are always the second and the fourth Wednesday of every month at 6:30 p.m. So you can pencil those dates in, because that's when they're regularly scheduled, unless for any reason that we may need to hold a meeting that not on a regularly scheduled date, then we do poll the members and can hold special meetings if needed. 4 board members are needed to constitute a quorum. It should be noted, though, that it's a majority vote is how it works here. But if that quorum isn't 1 park owner, 1 park representative, and 2 alternates, you need all 4 votes for it to pass if there's only 4 members here. Hopefully there'll be more. We have 7 regular and 8 alternates, so our goal is to try to have a full board on the night of hearings, but in the event that that does occur, which I believe in my 8 years here, I've seen that maybe once or twice. Yeah, that doesn't happen very often, but it's just good to know. And these meetings are pursuant to the Brown Act. We're going to get into some more of that legal fun stuff later on in the presentation, but just know that these are publicly noticed. We have to post and publish and allow for public comment, and everything is recorded, and there's minutes and whatnot. And speaking of recordings, if you go onto the city's website, I think going back to 2007, it sounds like some of you have watched them. You can see your reels from your previous hearings and to watch former hearings that have taken place in meetings. So Sandy and Dominique and Tara really appreciate good attendance. We know that sometimes these meetings can kind of be a little bit scattered, but we have had experiences in the past where we're trying to gather enough members to conduct meetings. There are some rules about attendance. So, attendance at these regular meetings is important. You can have 3 excused absences within a 12-month period, but you cannot have 6 absences period within a 12-month period. So even if they're excused or not. So try to, do your best to communicate. Sandy will be, she'll do the polling like she did for this training tonight to gauge availability. So make sure you communicate so that we can make sure that if you're unable to attend, that it's excused, and then we are keeping track of that. No more than 6 and 12 months. Fortunately for everybody, we probably, well, we haven't had a hearing in a little while, but I would say on average, we probably have 3 to 4 meetings a year. Although I'm gonna knock on wood because I probably just jinxed us all for this upcoming year. And it's also good to note that if you do miss a meeting and a decision was not made and it's going to be made at the following meeting, you are allowed to vote on that item if you watched the recordings and reviewed all of the materials. If you haven't, you will not be able to vote on that matter. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the officers of the board. So the chairperson, which our vice chair today, Maria, is acting as our chairperson today, presides over the meetings, and so making sure we stay on the agenda, making sure we're following the Roberts rules, which we'll get into later, and making sure that the time limits are adhered to is what the chair really does during the meetings. The chair also submits any formal recommendations that may need to go to city council, and signs all of the board resolutions. The chairperson is selected by a majority vote of the board. We'll talk about it a little bit later as well, but it will come back. Our chairperson had just resigned and stepped down from the board. I believe it was yesterday. So the vice chair is acting today. So at the next meeting, we will be voting on the chairperson and vice chair.
So who was that? Kendrick?
Yes.
he stepped down?
Yes. So then, all right, well, we will all give love to Kendrick at the end part of the meeting, but yes,
Yeah, he conducted meetings.
very well.
He knew Robert's rules forward and backward.
Yeah. Definitely be missed. So there's also a vice chair. So as I mentioned, so Maria is currently the vice chair and is acting tonight in place of the chairperson, which is why we have a vice chair in case that ever occurs. Again, the vice chair is selected by a majority vote of the board members. There is also a secretary in place, and I noticed this right before we came. There's a little bit of a typo down here. So some of you may remember Bert. Bert has retired, and now Sandy is acting as secretary for the board. So Sandy's responsibility is to keep all of the board's records. She prepares the minutes, acts as secretary during these meetings. You'll hear her doing roll calls. And make sure that we get all the votes and accurate and all the proceedings. So very important role.
So is Kendrick still on the board?
No, Kendrick is no longer on the board.
Period. Oh, okay.
Correct.
He totally stepped down. Okay.
Yes. I think life was happening. He has a very, very robust life happening. It should be noted that the chair and vice chair may be removed with or without cause by a majority vote of the board members. And, should a vacancy exist in either office, an appointment, again, shall be made by a majority vote of the board. I'm hoping we don't have to use that first provision. I have not seen it happen in my 8 years of doing this, but you never know. So some responsibilities. It's the board's responsibility prior to each rent increase hearing. So as we mentioned, there's probably one coming up in December, to go and visit the park in question. So the board members that are sitting on the dais that night will be asked by the chairperson, have you gone to visit the park? And there's usually a quick yes of that. So just make sure that, once you know that you are coming, especially if you're an alternate, it's very close to watch this and who's attending because it's your responsibility as well. Yes, Mr. Valdez.
I just want to go back how you were saying how the chair or vice chair can be removed. 2 questions. Could not anyone in the chair be removed by majority vote? And just as well, if the chair or vice chair or anybody else is going to be removed, could we go into the executive session without the person that we want to remove?
Repeat that one more time, please.
Okay, removing anybody on the board, could we, the board members, go into an executive session without the person that we want to remove to discuss that matter without that individual?
Ben.
No, the board can't remove one of its members.
Well,
You
go.
can name a chair and a vice chair, and those offices can rotate from time to time, but you can't remove someone from the board.
But only the vice chair and chair you can remove?
Yeah, the vice chair and chair, those are just the offices within the board.
Yeah.
You're naming them as the chair for purposes of presiding over the meetings. But when someone stops being the chair, it doesn't mean that they're not on the board anymore. Like if you vote to change who the chair is, that person's still on the board. They're just no longer the chair of the board.
Yeah, but the question, what was stated about removal of the chair or the vice chair.
That's referring to removal of their title as chair.
Exactly.
And they would then just be a regular board member, and a different board member would be the chair. But the board doesn't have the power to remove one of its members off the board. It would only be if the council removes them or if they resign.
Okay. And last thing, like I said, can we go in executive session without the chair or vice chair if we want to discuss removal?
No, because an executive session or a closed session, there's only specific circumstances under which you can hold a closed session. One of which would be like significant exposure to litigation. Like if there was a exposure, the city was being exposed to litigation by virtue of the potential decision of the board on a rent increase, then maybe you could do a closed session to discuss that matter. But the matter of naming someone as chair or removing them as chair wouldn't expose the city to significant risk of litigation, so it wouldn't qualify for that basis under the Brown Act to hold a closed session. It
Well,
would have to be done in open session.
Well, thank you. I just like to say that I just like learning, and I have no thoughts whatsoever of removing anybody.
I was gonna say you have Maria sweating over there.
I might add that I've been part of this board since 2007, and there's been one since 2007 closed session. So that's how infrequent it happens.
Yes, and if I may, just from my former experience, most members of the board or members of council, vice chair and chair, again, as you said, Ben, can only be removed based on the communication with city council and the term, or either they resign on their self.
All right. Okay, so let's go back to responsibilities. We need a big group hug. Hopefully that'll never happen. So, again, prior to a hearing, it's your responsibility to go and visit the park. Again, if you're an alternate, make sure you're kind of watching who's able to come. It's still kind of a good idea to go just in case sometimes there's like last minute, somebody got stuck in traffic or something. So it's a good idea to, go visit the park, even if you don't think you will be serving as a regular or as on the dais that evening. So in considering the rent increases and those requests, the board is responsible for a few different things. So the first one is the ordinance has 11 factors, which we'll be going through tonight, that are considered in whether or not to approve or not approve a rent increase. The board is also responsible for awarding a rent increase that it finds to be fair, just, and reasonable. Those are very specific and words there. So fair, just, and reasonable. Provides a fair return to the park owner. Again, that's a constitutional right. And ensures that rents are not excessive. So again, it's that balance between park owner and park resident interest. It should be noted that the board cannot deny a rent increase or give one that is lower than is needed to ensure a property owner their fair return on investment, even if it may pose a financial hardship to the residents. And so this is really tough when you start to see resident letters and resident comments, which will be part of your board packets. That's often something that is mentioned, and that is something that really cannot be considered because the owner is entitled to their fair return on their investment. And then a really important aspect is that once a hearing is done and closed, and a decision is made, it is deemed that that decision was based on facts that were correct, and we do not go back and look at the last application that was submitted or change any of those figures. So once we're starting on the premise that the last decision that was made was accurate and correct, and then we're moving forward from that point. It also should be noted that in the city of Carson, there is no provision to allow for a rent decrease. So the board is not allowed to approve a rent reduction. So no increase or some sort of positive increase is what is within your ability to do.
Question.
Yes.
So we, the board, cannot give a decrease or an increase whatsoever, period.
You cannot give a decrease. You can give an increase, but you cannot give a decrease in rent.
And you can only give an increase that's been applied for. You can't just approve an increase when the park owner hasn't requested one. And you can only approve an increase to the extent that the park owner has requested it in their written application.
Yeah, I can remember one hearing a long time ago, Ken Freshoff was here. He basically stated in his report that the owner had asked for X amount, but based on all the submitted data, he would have recommended a higher increase. However, the ordinance doesn't allow for that. You can't give them more than they ask for.
Right. So if a park owner requests a $10 increase, we can't approve a $100 increase, even if the math works that way. So that's a good point. Thank you for bringing that up, Mr. King, because that's a really good point. Sometimes, so a lot of the park owners now are very aware of this, and so when they submit their applications to us, they'll put in a number that might seem egregious, knowing that they aren't really asking for that, because after Dominique and I scrub binders and binders full of data and do all the math, they don't want to accidentally have asked for a number that was too low. So just something to note.
Are we going to discuss some of these things later on in the presentation, or should we interrupt you as we go along if we have some comments on these?
On the factors, or?
Well, just any of the things you're covering.
I guess you can ask, and then if we're going to cover it later, then I might just say we're going to cover it later, because we're going to go through the staff report, we're going to go through fair return and capital. So if you have a question or something to comment on, you're welcome to now.
Go
Yes,
ahead.
because I know I'm going to have questions. So yes, he made a very good point. If we can ask as you go along, because by the end of the night and you finish with it, we might be tired and forget to ask.
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I would just mention in the beginning, section by section, but I'm happy to answer as we go along. I will stay here as long as you want me to answer questions. So,
Well,
your call.
I think I think the part of visiting the park is extremely important. And I'm not saying everybody should do this, but one of the things I do is when I get a staff report, the first thing I do is I read the resident letters, and I make notes based on the resident letters. And then when I go visit the park, then if a resident says, you know, I don't know, XYZ, then I'll make a point of looking at XYZ so I can be informed and substantiate what they're writing, because until you see it, they're all just allegations.
Allegations that way.
Yes, yes. And one other thing is, I think, and Ben may expand on this, one other thing we have to be very careful of, we have to make our decision based on the data submitted and the testimony submitted under oath here in the hearing. So therefore, we have to be very careful when we're at a park not to engage in conversation with park owners,
Anyone.
management,
Yeah.
or residents, because I've had them come up, I want to show you this. I said, I don't want to look at it. I'll see what I have to see, come to the meeting, because our decision has to be based on sworn testimony.
Yes.
So, we can't say, well, the manager told me this, or the resident told me this. They have to tell us from where you're standing.
Yes. Yes. So that's why all the residents that were here tonight were like, we can't hear anything. And so even when you're out in the park, you're not even talking to park management. Like, they can open doors for you and let you in to see things, but do not talk about the application or hearing with anyone until the night of the actual hearing.
Yeah.
So we'll cover that some more later on in the presentation.
And that includes walking with them. Is that correct? Meaning one of us, or example, me or any of us, go to the park and we are going to go analyze it, and a resident comes, even though we're not speaking. Are you allowed to walk with them?
It's all about perception, so I would say no.
Yes, yes.
So to be safe, no.
Yeah, just for clarification.
I think that falls
Yes.
into the categories when you come in for a hearing. You'll many times see the applicant and you recognize them, Tom Kasparian for Goldstein's Parks. There's nothing wrong with going and exchanging pleasantries. Hi, Tom, how you doing? How's it been? But let's move on, because then the perception would be from the resident, well, look, you're in collusion with them, and it's the same with residents, so we have to be above board. We can't leave any perception that we favor one side or the other when we come up here.
Yes, I'm towards the end of the presentation. We'll be going through more of these points in detail, so if I can pause us from going down that road too much further. Yes.
Oh, wonderful, Tom. That was excellent. One last thing that I wanted to interject, if I may. There is a form that I created for the city of Carson, and I think it would be excellent. And Ben, you can take a look and see if you think it's appropriate for the Mobile Home Review Board. And the letters that come in for the Mobile Home Review Board constituents will have a little direction of what they need, what their issue is, and what they're going to be addressing with the MRB board. And then that way, Madam Chair can address it appropriately. We have a little heads up on it as well. So
All of the comments from the residents have to be submitted 10 days prior
In
to the public
advance,
hearing
right.
if it's written, but if they could come give testimony, and then all of that information we put in your actual staff reports, but we'll take a look at that as well to see if it could be helpful in the process.
perfect. Thank you.
Okay, 11 factors. Are we ready? Okay, great. So as I mentioned, there's 11 factors in the ordinance for the board to consider. We'll talk a little bit more detail at the end as well about what is included in the staff reports. I'm just going to briefly go over these 11 factors. The first is changes in the local consumer price indexes. Rent charged at comparable parks in Carson. Within your training manual, there is one of the exhibits that is the park comparison groups. And in the staff report, we have it all detailed out, the park comparison, the amenities they have, the rents they're charging, all of that stuff. So you kind of look, if there's 6 in that comparison group, where in the kind of rents is that park that's coming in kind of falling within that range. The length of time since the last rent increase. Dominique will get into more details about the 3 different types of rent increases that there are. The completion and cost of any capital improvements specified in the rent application. This one is one of the 11 factors, but it's actually its own separate application. So there's a fair return application, which we'll talk about, as well as a capital application. So when we look at capital improvements, there's a specific staff report that we use to analyze this specific factor. We also look at changes in property tax information and taxes related to the park, changes in rent paid by the park owner to lease the land. I have not experienced that within the city to date. I don't know, Tom or Maria, have you seen that? Factor 6, I don't believe we have any park owners that are leasing land, but it is one of the factors that can be considered if it is the situation. And in the case that there's factors that don't apply, when we draft our staff report, we make it very clear that this situation doesn't apply here. We also take a look at changes in utilities paid by the park owner for the park. We take a look at changes in reasonable operating and maintenance expenses. This portion is very detailed. When we start to get into the calculations, you'll understand why this is important. Our job, mine and Dominique's, is to literally, when I say scrub, residents and park owners know we go page by page, expense by expense, income line by income line, and make sure it's in the correct year, make sure there's backup documentation for all of that. We work back and forth with the park owner to make sure that all of that data is accurate so that you all can make your determination. If at any point you want to look at any of that information or have questions, you can talk to staff directly. You can't talk to each other. You can't talk to park owner. You can't talk to park resident. But if there are some questions, we can provide you with context. The 9th one is the need for repairs caused by circumstances other than ordinary wear and tear. The amount and quality of park services and amenities. Again, in that park comparison chart that you have in your manual, it also details out the various park amenities. And any written lease lawfully entered into between the applicant and the affected residents. We do take a look and get an understanding of if there's been any long-term leases that have been entered into. The 11 factors are listed in section 13 of your training binder. I'm going to pass it over to Ben. I'll just drive. You just have this one slide, right? I can just stand here and click if you don't want to get up. If you want to just talk from there.
Okay. So this slide is about the board's bylaws. The board adopted its own bylaws in 1998. They're included in your packet. They're item number 6 in your packet. And a lot of the subjects of the bylaws are covered in different slides of this presentation, so I won't duplicate the discussion. Board officers, meetings, quorum, and voting requirements are covered in slides 6 to 11. Although one thing I would add on that discussion, since we've had discussion about the chair and vice chair issues, is that currently we don't have a chair. Our chair just resigned. We have a vice chair, Vice Chair Horton, who was named a couple of years ago, I believe, during the proceedings of that year, and we've barely met in the past couple of years. I believe largely because of inflation, CPI being as high as it was. There haven't been as many fair return hearings because a lot of the park owners have been taking CPI increases, which are staff approved increases. So it is time for the board to name a new chairperson and vice chairperson soon. The charter, actually, the city's charter in section 603 talks about, as a general matter for all of the appointed boards, committees, and commissions, which includes the Mobile Home Rent Review Board, that it says, as soon as practicable, following the first day of every calendar year, or such other time as may be designated by resolution of the City Council, the members of each advisory board, committee, or commission shall appoint a member to serve as chair and or vice chair of such board, committee, or commission. So what I'm thinking the best thing to do would be is that come the new year, we'll probably be having some meetings next year, so the board's first meeting of the new year, we can include an agenda item to name a chair and a vice chair, and that's a non-public hearing item. For the upcoming hearing on Rancho Dominguez, board member Horton will be serving, Vice Chair Horton will be serving on the board because board member Forbath will be recused from that. So even though you're an alternate, you will be serving. So it makes sense to me that you act as chair for that hearing, and that first meeting of the new year, we can have an agenda item to name a chair and vice chair. So that's one portion of the bylaws, as it talks about, the board shall name a chair and vice chair. The bylaws also mention the meeting order of business. So they're very specific about how the meetings shall be conducted. This is section 4 of the bylaws. It says, all of the regular meetings of the board shall follow the following order of business. Call to order, pledge of allegiance, roll call, agenda approval, minutes approval, public hearings, unfinished business, new business, oral communications, and adjournment. So all of our agendas will follow that exact set of items, even if there are none for a particular category. It'll probably be listed on the agenda, unless the board holds a special meeting, in which case we could have a different agenda order. You might not have some of those items. Yeah.
I just want to point out that this is in your book. It's in section 6, so if anybody wants to follow along, he is referring to section 4.
And yeah,
here,
and
so-
you don't
so,
need to, because I'm
section
kind of
6, but
summarizing the
just in
sections.
case.
Yeah, if you do
some
want
people
to,
were
it's
looking.
there, or you can read it later. You can look at it later. It's a handy. I think it's an easy to read, handy document. That's a good thing to know. So it's definitely good to get acquainted with. But for now, I'll just kind of cover the items that aren't being covered in the other slides. So resolutions is something that the bylaws address. Article 4, Section 2 of the bylaws says that no action granting or denying a rent increase shall be final until the adoption of a formal resolution by the board setting forth its findings in connection therewith. So what that means is that when a rent increase application comes before you, you will be presented with a written resolution, and you don't have the authority to grant or deny the rent increase until you've adopted a written resolution to do so, and the resolution will contain the necessary findings to do so. So yeah, that's important. We'll always have a proposed resolution for you going into the meeting that will be consistent with staff's recommendation. But if it turns out that the board wants to do something different than staff's recommendation, then we would need to make modifications to the resolution to set it up so that you're adopting the correct resolution that reflects and supports your decision. So another thing that the bylaws cover is conflicts of interest and recusal requirements. So this is also something that was briefly mentioned by Board Member King, and I think it's, definitely worthwhile to go over it again. So Article 5 of the bylaws contains 2 sections, and I'm going to read them because they're very important. So Section 1 of that article says, for voting, that no member of the board, including alternates, shall in any way use his or her official position to influence or participate in the making of a decision of the board concerning a rent increase request for a mobile home park in which that board member is either a tenant or has an ownership interest. This provision shall not preclude a member from testifying as a member of the public, either for or against the rent increase. So what that means is, and as I just alluded to with Board Member Forbath, if you are a park owner board member, if you're a park owner representative board member, if your park is the applicant requesting a rent increase before the board, you can't serve on the board naturally for that because you obviously have a financial interest in the decision of the board. So in that case, you could participate as a member of the public or as an applicant, but you couldn't participate as a board member. And you would need to refrain from using your position or your influence as a board member to influence or participate in any way in the decision of the rent review board, because the rent review board is intended to be neutral, fair, impartial. Even though some of the members are park resident representative members and others are park owner representative members, that doesn't mean you advocate for one decision or another that's in the best interest of those particular groups. You all have an obligation to be fair, impartial, and follow the rules of the ordinance and the guidelines. So Section 2 of Article 5 of the bylaws is entitled Board Contacts, and it says all deliberations and actions of the board shall be done during public meetings and hearings. No board member or alternate shall discuss a rent increase application, the materials submitted in support or opposition of it, or the staff report with anyone other than the board staff or the city attorney's office, except during the public hearing on the application. This prohibition applies to discussion prior to the hearing, during any recesses in the hearing, and to discussion of a decision of the board after it has been made. The only exceptions to this prohibition are: 1, that a homeowner member of the board and a park owner member of the board are allowed to discuss the application for a rent increase in the park in which he or she lives or he or she owns outside the public hearing. And 2, board members may discuss an application in a closed session meeting if a closed session is called per the Brown Act. So that's just the full text of what Board Member King was referring to. And again, that really just means that prior to the hearing or during any recesses or after the hearing, you don't discuss the merits or the details of a rent increase application with any of the residents of the park or any of the owners of the park. It just can give an appearance of bias, it doesn't look good, and it can sway you in a way that would be inappropriate, because all of the information that you gather and the discussions that you have and the decisions that you make should really occur during the public meeting and during the public hearing. So if you are outside of that and you're talking to someone and no one else can see, it's kind of going against the public spirit of the proceedings, as well as potentially swaying you in a way that other board members are not being swayed. You're having different information than they have. So you are potentially acting based on information that wasn't presented during the public hearing and didn't go through the proper processes. So it can go to the fairness of the decision, and it can also go to Brown Act issues, which is the public transparent meeting requirement of the meeting. So that's why those sections are so important. And then finally, the bylaws say that they can be amended by approval of a majority of the board. So there's nothing precluding the board in the future from making a change to these bylaws. They're your bylaws. They were adopted by the board in 1998. They can be changed, but keep in mind that they're there for a reason, because they're there to protect compliance with the law, and I think that they're very well done. They're good bylaws.
I might add too that be very cautious when there's emails. Sometimes an email is sent out either by you or staff or something. If you're going to reply, do not reply all. Just reply to the sender, because when you reply all, you're verging on violating the Brown Act.
Right, and I can explain that a little more. And if I ever email the whole board, you'll see a big, all caps, bold disclaimer at the top that says, please do not reply all. And I request the same to be done by our secretary and our staff when they email the entire board, because they're going to give you, they may give you a group email just to give you a brief, notice or something like that. But if it turns out that one of the board members replies all, and it becomes a chain discussion of of matters that relate to, items that are before the board, whether it's a rent increase or other items within the jurisdiction of the board. If a majority of the board discusses and deliberates or acts upon an item within the jurisdiction of the board that's outside of our notice public meeting that's in these chambers, then it's a Brown Act violation. So that would be that would be unlawful. So that's why we try to avoid that.
And then I just want to
Exactly.
interject.
Oh.
So if you see an email from me, usually you will not see your names. I've blocked them out, and you can reply all as long as everybody's names are not there. And you'll probably likely see that from me, and I'll copy staff, just so you're aware.
And I just like to say, Ben, what you're saying is so true. The Brown Act applies. I've been in the board meeting with the Mobile Home Review Board. It's tough as far as city council, making sure that we stay that Rancho Dominguez thing, and then most importantly, making sure that anybody that we communicate with that is on the board too, that they keep in mind the Brown Act so we don't get any violations, and that we are in compliance, and direct them to public comment, to Mrrb.
I think a general rule of thumb is when in doubt, just ask staff.
Yes.
And you guys can talk to each other here. And even that's written, that's email, any type of that correspondence. So
Yeah, once you receive the staff report and the resolution and the whole agenda packet before a hearing, if you have any questions about it, feel free to call me, feel free to call staff, and we will answer your questions. And we are the ones to talk to about that information leading up to the hearing.
okay, so we are now going to be moving into the 3 types of rent increases. So I'm going to pass it over to Dominique to go through that.
All right. How's everybody doing? Hanging in there? Okay. So as Tara said, my name is Dominique Clark, and I've been working with Tara for the last 8 years, I guess it's been, on mobile home park issues in Carson. So we're going to talk about rent increases, since as Tara said, that's going to be the bulk of what you're focusing on, are rent increases. So tonight we want to make sure that every single member is very aware of the 3 types of rent increases that are allowed in Carson mobile home parks, and you know the differences between them. So we're going to talk about the 3 types. So the first one we've referred to a little bit already tonight. We call it the CPI rent increase. So CPI stands for Consumer Price Index. So whenever you hear that, just think inflation. So the Consumer Price Index is the federal government's official measure of inflation. So this is the most common rent increase that comes in. And the city ordinance says that every park owner can come in once every 12 months, and they can ask to increase their rents in relation to inflation, but only 75% of inflation, not 100%, and it's capped at 8%. So that means if there's a time where maybe an owner hasn't come in for 5 years and inflation has increased 20%, let's say, they can't then ask for 75% of 20% because they didn't come in for a long time. The max that they can get is 8%. But the important thing to remember with CPI rent increases is those will not come before the board. They're very quick and easy calculation to do, so staff is trained to handle those. So you won't see those, but it's important that you know about them and know that any rent increase that comes to you, they're asking for that in addition to this annual increase that they can get based on inflation. So for every single type of rent increase, it obviously takes time to process the application. And so the applicant is asked to pay a fee to cover the costs of staff time or consultant time. So for the CPI rent increase, because it's pretty quick to process, that has the lowest fee. It ranges from $605 to about $1,200, and it's based on the number of spaces in the park. And then plus they pay a small fee of $2 per space for printing and postage. So then the next type of rent increase is a fair return rent increase. So a park owner requests a fair return rent increase when they believe that the annual CPI rent increases aren't enough for them to get a fair return on their investment. And so as Tara said, in the United States, every property owner has a constitutional right to earn a fair return on their investment. So every single city or county that has some kind of local rent control or rent stabilization program, they have to have another process by which a park owner can say, hey, your rent limits are keeping me from getting a fair return on investment. And I can prove to you, if I show you my income and my expenses, that I'm not getting a fair return. So this is Carson's process of meeting that, that legal requirement. So we call it a fair return rent increase application, and owners can come in up to once a year, and we have a deadline for it. So fair return applications are always tied to a specific calendar year. And so after the calendar year ends, they have until June 30th to submit a fair return application. So by July 1st, we're able to say, okay, we're gonna have this many fair return applications that we need to process this year because the deadline is June 30th. So for example, the upcoming rent increase hearing that's coming up, it's based on the 2023 calendar year. And then whoever didn't meet the June 30th deadline, they have to wait till next year and apply for the 2024 year by June 30th of 2025. And as Tara mentioned, it's a lot of work to process a fair return application. We're literally going through all of their income for the entire year and all of their expenses for the entire year, expense by expense, going through and making sure that everything they submitted is correct, all the math adds up. It's a reasonable expense, a reasonable amount. So it takes a lot of time. And so city staff does not handle that. And instead, Tara and I and Ben, we all review that together. And we prepare a very nice staff report for you all that just kind of summarizes all of our analysis. And then we present that to you at the hearing along with our recommendations for how much to consider for a rent increase. And we give you multiple options. They're just options. The board doesn't have to follow any of them, but we just give you some options just to kind of get the conversation going. And as you can imagine, it takes a lot more time to process these applications. So the fee is much larger than a CPI rent increase. And those fees are shown here. It's $22,500 for a smaller park. It's $30,000 for a bigger park, 151 spaces or more. And then we'll go into more detail about each of these, but this is just giving you a high level. So then the third type is the capital improvement rent increase. So this rent increase is different than the others in that it's a request for a temporary rent increase. And a park owner can request this when they put in a capital improvement. And so that means they're either adding an amenity to the park that wasn't there before. So for example, if there wasn't a pool in a park and they add a pool in, that's a capital improvement. Or it can be if they are substantially rehabilitating something that was already existing in the park. So maybe there was a pool, but they completely redo it and it's like brand new. Nothing small, not like they did a little bit of a tile work or something. It had to be something major and it looks like brand new, then that can be considered a capital improvement as well. And then they're asking for a temporary rent increase just so that they can be reimbursed for how much they paid for that capital improvement. So for that, as far as frequency, owners can come in as much as they need. There's no limit there. And like the fair return, consultants, Tara, Ben, and I, we review those, and then we prepare a staff report for the board to approve a rent increase. And the application fee is $13,000 plus $15 per space. So that's an overview. We'll go deeper into the fair return and the capital in a moment, since those will be the ones that'll come before the board. So this is small, I realize, and we are going to email you a copy of this so you can refer to it, and plus it's a lot of information. So we will email that to you after this meeting. But we wanted to walk you through what the process looks like from start to finish. So the first step is the park owner submits an application along with application fee. And so when that happens, city staff, and I'm including Tara, Ben, and I, and city staff just for simplicity, we send a letter to the residents letting them know your park owner submitted an application for a fair return or a capital. The CPI is a different process, so we're just gonna focus on these two. So the residents are given notices throughout the whole entire process. We wanna make sure that they're aware of what's going on. So from the get-go, we let them know the application has been submitted. You can come in to look at the application if you'd like to. We can't answer any of their questions yet because we're just reviewing it ourselves, but if they wanna take a look, they can. That's step one. And then from that day, when we have the application and the fee, we have 30 days to determine whether the application is complete. So an application is complete if it has all the information that staff needs to prepare a report for you all to make a decision. We have never, in the last 8 years, gotten the complete application on day one. So usually we deem it incomplete at least once, sometimes many, many times. And what happens is we let the park owner know, hey, it's incomplete right now, but this is a list of items that we need or clarifications that we need in order to deem it complete. And so then, exactly, it's a checklist. And then they respond, and then that might raise more questions, or they forgot a couple things, and then we deem it incomplete again. So this is the step that takes the longest, is getting the application to completeness. But once that is done and the application is complete, we send the residents a letter again saying, okay, now the application is complete. Now we can answer any questions that you have about the expenses because we've reviewed them ourselves, and we're happy to meet with you. And then also at that time is when we invite the residents to submit written comments if they'd like to. So they can submit letters, they can submit photos, whatever it is in writing, they can submit it to us, and we will include that as an exhibit to your staff report as well. So you'll be able to see all of those. So they have 30 days to do that. And then the fourth step is that we schedule the public hearing for the board to meet, and you will all get a public hearing notice as well as the owner and the residents, and that has to happen at least 15 days prior to the hearing date. So then step 5 is we inspect the park. That's also when we prepare the staff report and all the exhibits. There's a lot of documents that go into your board packet, as you will see for those of you who haven't received it before. And then at least 5 days prior to the hearing, we mail out the staff reports to you all so you can review it before the meeting. So one thing I will say is sometimes the mail is slow. So we do also email it to you all so that you can start reviewing it that way. I know Board Member King, he likes to come to City Hall, and he can tell Sandy, hey, don't mail mine, I'll come and pick it up. You all are welcome to do that as well. So we try to get that information to you as soon as possible, but you know, we're usually working within very tight deadlines. So, and then we have the actual hearing, and note that the hearing must be held within 60 days of the application being deemed complete. So once the application is deemed complete, the clock starts, and we are jamming to try to get everything done and ready for the hearing. And then at the hearing, you all will make your decision on how much the rent increase amount will be. And then the final step is that we send the residents another letter saying, okay, your rent increase amount was approved by the board. This is the amount, and this is the resolution number where the board approved the rent increase amount. And then I will note, it's the asterisk at the bottom, that there are some instances, it's very rare, when we're not able to hold the hearing within 60 days. If that happens, the owner is entitled to a temporary rent increase to compensate them for the delay of hearing. Nobody likes that. It's very hard to explain to the residents, so we avoid it as much as we can. We try to stick within the 60 days as much as possible. So any questions on the process? Sure.
Yeah, you know, like you said, we can approve the rent increase, but we can contest it just as well if we don't see that it's adequate, and you can adjust it if necessary.
As a board, you're asking if you can?
We can do that.
Yes, so I think what you're asking is, so if a park owner comes in, they're asking for, I don't know, $25 rent increase. As Tara said, you can either approve the up to $25, or you could say we grant no rent increase. You can't approve a decrease, but you can say we grant no change in their rents.
even though that, like what you just said, just as well, if we see that it's way too high, we can, ask staff to look at the numbers more carefully, and it could be decreased because it isn't properly adjusted right.
Well, we'll get into in a second our calculations that go into the rent increase, and it's very specific formula that we follow. Tara, I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
So-
I was just going to add, so the staff reports include a staff recommendation, and then the resolution has staff's recommendation. Sorry, you're like behind me, but the mic is here. Okay. So it's just a recommendation, but there's part of the staff report as the multiple factors and the different amounts that the board could choose. That doesn't have to be staff's recommendation. So you do have the ability to consider the facts. We don't necessarily go back and like go through every expense line item, but there are options within the staff report for you to consider. You don't have to go with what staff is recommending.
That's where we get into our deliberations. At the close of the public hearing, which means the people don't leave, it's just the public hearing is closed, and then the chair will have deliberations, and we'll talk about it based on testimony from the park owner or the representative or the residents. We as a board may think that the staff recommendation should be a little different than what it is. And so we have those deliberations, and during the deliberations, somebody on the board will make a motion, and if it gets seconded, then there's discussion on the motion and a vote. And during those discussions, somebody could make a substitute motion. If that gets a second, then there's deliberations on that, and based on that, then the substitute motion is voted on first, and if that passes, that's it. And if it fails, then it's back to the original motion by the board.
Thank you, Tom.
Yeah, and I don't know, you're going to talk about the 75-day limit too with the resolution. You know, sometimes if there's, like Attorney Jones told us that they prepare a resolution ahead of time based on the staff's recommendation. If the board approves staff's recommendation after all of the hearing process goes through, then we have the resolution already in front of us. If there's some minor changes to that resolution, they can be made actively, and we can still vote on that resolution. However, if there's major changes, then we may have to come back in 2 weeks and vote on the resolution. And that's why the ordinance has a 60 days to the hearing and 75 days to approve it.
Yes, Tom, excellent, got it. You just took some of the words out of my mouth. So Dominique, what Attorney Jones said about the sliding scale that is in place somewhat, that they can't go over a certain amount, but we're where we are, and then we would vote on it. And if in the event that amount is not sufficient or not agreed upon, then as Tom said, then we can do another motion and say, let's motion it or second it for another amount.
Right.
But we can't decrease it.
And one thing we have to do is we have to give the staff's recommendation, the route to that recommendation is laid out in the staff report
Right,
and in the resolution.
exactly.
Should we, as a board, choose to have some other amount, then as Judge Chalfant, I believe it was, stated, you must show the path to that resolution, the analytical route to get to that
Exactly.
resolution. You can't just,
Yeah.
you can't just throw a dart and say, well, instead of 20,
No.
why don't we just give them 15?
You have to have
can't.
good
You have to give
cause.
all the reasons behind that.
Yeah, and there has to be good cause. So we can't just increase, based on yada, yada, yada. There does have to be good cause and justification for each and every change or anything with regard to the rent increase that somebody may be requesting, or a motion being brought before the board for the board members to vote on. So that's, Dominique, I just wanted to say that there is, and as Tom indicated, I concur and agree, there has to be a sliding scale that is in place, which we have, that says, okay, it can't go over this, all the mobile home owners know that this is what we've agreed on, that you can go up this amount and no more, and then we vote on it.
Right, right. I agree.
I'd like to just say thank you for saying that second part, Tom, and thank you for agreeing.
Okay. I do want to reiterate what Tom said because I think it's really important is that if you're varying from staff's recommendation, which is fine, I think it's just really important for the record to say why. So maybe like there were expenses that we included and we approved that you don't think should be included. Like that would be a good example of why you think the rent increase should be lower, or because you saw the park and there were some hazardous conditions or there were some health and safety concerns. There just has to be some kind of reason that we would want to be in the record for your reasoning.
And for the fair return, you would usually look at the 11 factors to help guide you in that.
Any other questions on the process before we go on?
Do you have any more water?
Oh, yeah, we do.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we're about to go into numbers. Would you guys like a break now? Or do you want to break? Okay, we're gonna take a break now and we'll come back in 5 minutes. So what time is it? Please come back at 7:58. Thank you.
Can we have everyone come back up, please? Because we would like to start the meeting again. Thank you. Okay, we're going to start the meeting now. Thank you. Go ahead, Dominique.
Okay. Everybody ready to keep going? All right. Okay, so we're going to dive deeper into capital improvements and fair return rent increases. So the ordinance defines what a capital improvement is. So part of your job when a capital improvement application comes in is determining whether you agree that the expenses included in the application are indeed a capital improvement. So that's why the definition is really important. So the definition is improvements to a mobile home park and major rehabilitation of a mobile home park that involve more than ordinary maintenance and repairs. So going back to the pool example I gave earlier, like if an owner does a little bit of tile work, we consider that just ordinary maintenance. Like that's just part of having a pool in the park. But if they completely redo the pool, then that's a capital improvement. And we'll give you more examples as we go. So the different buckets of capital improvements are: one, if they replace or do major reconstruction to an existing facility or improvement, or if they add completely new facilities that weren't there before. So it could be like a new pool, a new office, or if there is a clubhouse and maybe they add an addition to the clubhouse, that would be adding more square footage, so that would count. And then also if there's major rehabilitation that was necessitated by acts of nature. So if there was like a flood or an earthquake, knock on wood, or a fire, anything like that, and they have to do major work, that would also count as a capital improvement. So let's talk about what's not considered a capital improvement, because that's also helpful. So something not considered a capital improvement is just normal routine maintenance and repair. So a really good example we like to use are streets. So you will see a lot of expenses related to streets. It's amazing. So patching potholes, not a capital improvement. That's just something that happens all the time. That's part of maintaining a park. Slurrying asphalt streets. I am not an expert on slurring, but my understanding of slurring is basically the streets are getting worn down, and instead of completely redoing the streets, they will put a seal on the top of the streets, and that extends the life of the streets. So that is considered normal maintenance. That's not capital improvement because it's not making the roads like brand new. It's just extending the life as of today. So that's some examples there. And then also not considered capital improvement are portable items, and it specifically says that in the guidelines. So things like landscaping equipment, no matter how expensive it is, if it's portable, it's not tied to the land, that's not a capital improvement. Also pool furniture is another example we see a lot because that can be moved. That's not a capital improvement. But there's one exception to that rule. So if the portable items are part of a larger project, so going back to the pool, I don't know why we're stuck on pools, why I'm stuck on pools, but if pool furniture by itself is not a capital improvement, But if an owner redid the entire pool area, including the pool furniture, then it can be included. So that's the little caveat there. So there's a couple types of capital improvements that we say, yes, they are capital improvements, but they still can't be included in a capital improvement application. So the first one is a capital improvement where the park owner charges a fee to use it. So the best example of this are washing machines. So if a park owner gets new washing machines, they cannot put that in the capital improvement if the residents have to pay to use that machine. Because what we're trying to avoid is residents have to pay for the same thing multiple times, double dipping. So that's why that's not allowed. And then the other example, which is similar, is if there was a capital improvement, like say there was a car that ran into a fence or something like that, and the park owner had to replace the fence, but they used insurance money to replace the fence, then that cannot be passed through in a capital improvement application because, again, they already got reimbursed once from insurance. They can't be reimbursed again through the residents. But one important note on this, because it comes up in hearings, residents will say, whenever they see capital improvement expenses, why didn't the owner just ask insurance to cover it? So we do not tell a park owner when to use insurance to cover anything. That is a business decision that's up to each individual park owner. So we don't get involved in that level. And so that's up to the owner, each owner. Any questions on that before we get on to points to remember? So the first thing with capital improvements to remember is that the application fee that the city charges, the $13,000, can be included in the application. So say they spent $50,000 worth of capital improvements and then the application fee is $13,000, they can tack that on and basically pass through $63,000 as capital improvement. And then for members who've been on the board for a while, you might remember we used to have a deposit system, and the $13,000 was just a deposit. We've switched to a flat fee, which makes things a little bit easier. The second point is that interest can be charged with a capital improvement rent increase. So we factor for interest in our calculations. And the reason being that the owners are being repaid over a long period of time. And the ordinance and the guidelines specify what interest rate to use. They say that we need to use whatever is the 30-year fixed mortgage at the time of the application plus 1%. So that's what we follow. And then the third bullet point, if a resident doesn't want to pay interest, they can say, I'd rather just pay my whole entire amount in a lump sum. So we always calculate that as well in the staff report. So the math for a capital improvement is pretty straightforward. So in the example of a $63,000, so we talked about $50,000 capital improvements plus the $13,000 application fee would be $63,000, right? So say there were 63 spaces in a park, they would each pay $1,000. The math is very straightforward. And then once you add in the interest, that kind of complicates things. But if a resident says, hey, I have $1,000, I just want to pay it up front and I don't want to pay interest, they always have that option. And then the next bullet point, park owners are not required to obtain a minimum number of bids. So we put this in there because this comes up in hearings where residents will say, why did they spend so much on X? I know a guy who could have done that for a lot cheaper. And that may be true, but again, that's a business decision of the owner, and we don't get involved in making sure that they provide a certain number of bids or anything like that. We trust that they're incentivized to keep their costs low and reasonable. And then lastly, the difference between the rent increase options are how long the residents have to pay back the owner. And that's an important decision that you all are making as a board. And that could be the trickiest decision, honestly, for capital improvement applications that the board has to decide on is how long do you want the residents to have to pay back the owner? So that could be a year, that could be 5 years, that could be 10 years, et cetera. The one boundary that's in the guidelines is that capital improvement rent increases shouldn't be larger than 10%. So the longer you give residents to pay back the owner, the lower the rent increase is gonna be, but also the more interest they're going to pay. So that's kind of what you're balancing is the interest versus the rent increase amount. And we have some calculations to show you what we mean by that. So here's an example from a park in Carson. This was taken out of a staff report that we did previously. And so this is what you'll get in your packet, and it'll show you different options for how long the owners or the residents have to pay back the owner. And I'll walk you through how to read this. But before I say that, you might be wondering, well, how do we decide how long it should be? So one thing we try to keep in mind is how long is the useful life of that capital improvement. So say they replaced, I don't know, an air conditioning unit, and the air conditioning unit lasts 10 years. You don't want residents paying it back over 20 years, because then they're paying it way after the thing has to be replaced again. So that's something that you want to keep in mind. But other things come into play too, like how many spaces are in the park. So if there are a lot of spaces in the park, then that's more people to share the cost among, where if it's a smaller park, you have less people to share it among, so it's going to be a higher rent increase amount. So those are the kind of things that you're thinking about. So this is what we'll provide you in your packet. And so in this example on the left, it says what the total capital improvement expense amount is. So in this case, it was about $143,000. And then we're showing you the interest rate that we're applying, which is the 30-year mortgage rate plus 1%. So interest rates were much lower and then this time. So 3.81%. And then you see between the three boxes, so each blue box is a different option. The top one being if residents paid it back in 1 year versus the second one is 2 years, the third one is 3 years. And so you see the months are changing in each option based on how many years. And then we calculate how much interest that they would have to pay. So the longer you're giving the residents to pay it back, the higher the interest is. And then if you go towards the right, the second to the right, we divide how much they have to pay back by the number of spaces in the park so that it's all being shared equally among everyone in the park. And then as you see, as we go along in years, the rent increase amount goes down. So that's exactly what we talked about. And then we'll provide you a lot of options. Here's even more options for going to 30 years even. So when you go to 30 years, the rent increase goes down to $1.60. And so a lot of residents might say, we want that one because it's the lowest one. But you also have to keep in mind, look at how much interest that they're paying. They're paying $97,000 of interest on $143,000 of expenses. So that's a lot of interest. So that's what you're trying to weigh as a board, are those kind of decisions. And then one very helpful thing that's in your guidelines, which is in your packet, is we have a list of what are good estimates of useful life of different types of capital improvements. So that way you can make sure you're not approving a period of time that's way longer than what the improvement is likely going to last. So you'll see even there's ranges. So if you look at the first one, it's saying major appliances that are residential last from 10 to 18 years. So there's still range there, and you still have to, there's judgment calls there, and that's why we have you all as the board to kind of deliberate that and decide. But at least it gives you kind of a guidepost, a place to start. So that's it on capital improvements. Any questions on that before we go to fair returns?
I just might throw out here, a lot of times in public testimony, and this applies to whether it be fair return or capital, residents have mentioned in the past, on capitals, they'll mention, well, they didn't use a licensed contractor. That's beyond our purview. We're not here to judge that, just like we can't require multiple bids. The other thing is sometimes residents will mention, well, why are they allowed to claim that expense? Because they can take it off their taxes. Again, that's beyond our purview. It has nothing to do with this. So it's important to keep that in mind when we're doing our deliberations, for whatever that's worth.
Thank you, Tom. That's great.
And I just wanted to reiterate what you were saying too, Tom. That is part of, and I'm sure Attorney Jones can concur, whoever the public comment or the mobile home review board is being addressed with regard to taxes or anything that's out of the scope of what we can vote on, we have to redirect them, that it's out of our scope.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Again, I'll just talk in capital improvement. Reading the ordinance is real important. If we haven't read it in a while and the capital's coming before us, read it because it addresses streets. which is a four-letter word sometimes, but like Matthew Weiss of HCD mentions, this the four-letter words is trees and sheds. Anyway, you know, it stipulates in there, sometimes a park owner may lay some asphalt down. They may grind down a certain amount and lay new asphalt. But the ordinance is very specific about how much they have to take up and lay down before it becomes capital. And that was a bone of contention one time with one of the parks, and it made a difference of $40,000 in the capital improvement. So that's why we need to be real up to date before we hear a capital, especially if that's one of the listed items in there. We need to make sure that we're on board with the ordinance.
Agreed. I would say some questions you want to ask when you have a capital improvement before you is, again, just to recap, is do you agree that all of these expenses meet the definition of a capital improvement? Another thing is when you go to the park, look at what they said they put in and make sure you see it and that it looks like it's in good working order. And then third is how long should we call it the amortization period, the period over which residents have to pay it back. Those are like the big questions for the board.
The timeline's important too.
Yes.
Because sometimes an owner doesn't make the capital improvement last month and they file an application now. They may know that on their schedule, they're going to do some capitals over the next couple of years. And so they wait and submit them all at once. So they have one application. Mm-hmm. So you may be seeing a submitted expense for something that was done 2 years ago. So because it's not bright and shiny, you have to take that in consideration when you look at it, especially when you come to streets. Because when you get a big park, heaven forbid that they do all the streets at the same time, the capital improvement will be huge. I know a small park right now that has a bid that's a 45 or 46 space park, and their bid is like $360,000. So if you get a bigger park, it's going to be a huge expense. And to the point of a capital, we had one before. Maria will probably remember this one, that the capital expense improvement was spread over like 32 years. And it was years 0 to 10 was this amount. Mm-hmm. And then from 11 to so on, you remember it.
Yeah, we remember.
Tara. And you know, to give what's fair to the park owner too. I mean, right. You know, fair to the residents because you're not hitting them with a big amount. Fair to the park owner because they're getting some of it back. But in the resolution and the decision of the board that we agreed that years 11 to 20, it was going to increase, so on and so forth. So that's something, if you get bigger expenses, that we're going to have to look at too.
Right. Yes, I do remember that one. I still have nightmares about it. Yeah, I think the issue there was the amount was so large of their total expenses that we could not mathematically stay under the 10% threshold that was in the guidelines in the ordinance. So we had to get a little creative there. But to your point, Tom, I think it's a great one that even though there's no limit on how many times an owner can come in with a capital improvement application, each time they submit one, they get charged $13,000. So they're incentivized to kind of wait till they do a bunch of them and then submit them all at the same time. So by the time you're seeing it, to Tom's point, it might be not brand new anymore.
We also want to remember that not all spaces are counted as well. So even though you may see it's 420 spaces in your calculations, not all of them are counted in the calculation when we get to the amount. Some are owner spaces.
Yeah. I was going to say for capital improvements, they are all included, but you're thinking of fair return, of which Dominique is about to go to. Yeah, because for a capital, the streets, everybody uses the streets. So we calculate, the math is done that way, but they may only charge the 404 spaces that are subject to the ordinance. Yeah. Yes. But you're correct, but that's fair return.
Good segue. We're going to talk about fair returns. Okay, so as we mentioned, fair returns is a very tedious process because we go through all of their income, all of their expenses. So this slide shows all the different income that we look at for each park if they come in with a fair return application. So we look at everything: rent, laundry, utility reimbursements, late fees, storage fees, park, everything. All their income, we look at it. And then we also look at all of their expenses. And there's so many categories here. And it varies widely by park. So some of the really big parks will have all of these categories and more. And then some small parks, they might not have a pool, so there's no pool maintenance. Or they might have very limited landscaping, so there's very limited landscaping costs. So it varies widely from park to park. But we look at everything. Okay, so when it comes to fair return rent increases, there are typically 4 recommended staff options that we provide to the board. So again, we're just giving you options. You don't have to choose any of them. Usually the board chooses one of them, but you don't have to. But these are the 4 that you're gonna see in our report. So the first option is that you could grant exactly what the park owner requested. If you feel like their request was reasonable, and if our numbers justify that amount, or as we talked about earlier, if we find that probably a higher rent increase would actually be reasonable, but we can't go above what they requested, so then we just give them what they requested. So that's the first option. The second option is CPI, which is to give them a rent increase in proportion to the increase in inflation. Now you might be saying, well, why would we do that if we already have a CPI rent increase application option? Why would they go through all of this just to get CPI? So one thing I will say is the regular CPI rent increase is capped at 75% of CPI. So you could give an owner 100% of CPI, or if you have a case where an owner hasn't come in for multiple years and they're hitting that 8% cap, and that's the max they can get, you could go above that. Even if you give them 75% of CPI, you could get above that 8% cap. But that's very rare that we use the CPI. Spoiler alert, we usually do the last option, which is the maintenance of net operating income. So we're gonna talk a lot about that option. So the next 2, gross profits maintenance and maintenance of net operating income, is where a lot of math comes into play. I personally love math, but I know not everyone feels that way about math. So I totally understand that. So the goal in walking you through these isn't to make sure you understand every single number per se. We're gonna give you numbers so that you have examples. And for those of you who also love math, they're there, so you can run the numbers yourself. But I do hope that everyone walks away with the concept of like understanding what the math is supposed to do. And then you can trust us to do the calculations, but I think it's important to understand the concept. So we're gonna talk about the last 2 in closer detail. So the gross profits maintenance, basically what the goal is, as Tara said, whatever the board has decided in the past, we assume that that was fair, just, and reasonable at that time, and we're just gonna move forward from there. So basically with the gross profits maintenance, we're saying whatever profit you had after the last fair return rent increase that you got, we wanna make sure you still have that profit today after accounting for inflation since then and accounting for your expenses going up since then. So let's walk you through the math. So there's 3, I call them building blocks of the gross profits maintenance. And again, there's a lot of numbers here, but I'll just walk you through high level what's happening. So we're always looking at 2 years in a fair return rent increase application. We're looking at what we call the base year, which is the year that they got their last fair return rent increase for. So that's always the base year. And then we're looking at the current year, which is the year they're coming in for now. So if a park submitted their fair return rent increase in June, the year that we're looking at now is 2023. So the hearing that you guys are about to go into, the year will be 2023 is the current year. So the base year and the current year, they always change depending on the application. For this example, it's 2017 and 2018, but that always changes depending on the timing of that particular park's application. So what we're doing here is we're just looking at how much have their expenses changed since the last time they got a fair return rent increase approved. So in this example, their total park expenses went from 1.7 million on the left to 1.9 million on the right. But an important thing is we always take out mortgage interest. So some parks have a mortgage and some don't, because some already paid theirs off. So we always look at mortgage separately. That's a really important thing to note. So we always take that out of this first step. So on the left, after we take out their $475,000 of mortgage interest, we're left with $1.2 million of expenses. And then on the right, we're at $1.3 million of expenses. So you see that you have to trust our math here, but their expenses increased $93,000. Okay, so then you divide that by all the spaces in the park minus the manager space. So in this park, there's 420 spaces. We're taking out the one manager space, so that gets us to 419. And then we divide it by 12 months in a year. So that gets us to $18.58. And what that amount is how much the rent would have to be increased to cover the increase in expenses since 2017, between 2017 and 2018. Does that make sense? So remember that number if you can, $18.58, because you're going to see it again, because this is just step one of the calculation. So then the next step is now, since we took out mortgage interest in the first part, now we have to deal with mortgage interest. So now we're just gonna look at that and see how much their mortgage interest increased. So in this case, it increased $166,000. And we do the same thing. We divide it by 419 spaces in 12 months. So that gets us to $33. So just to cover the increase in mortgage interest at this park was $33, which is more than all their other expenses. So that's why we always look at mortgage interest separately. So that's number two. So if you can, remember this number because you're gonna see it again, $33.03. And then the last step is where we want to account for inflation. So this is what I was saying before, is we look at what was their profit after the last fair return rent increase was approved. So in this case, you're gonna see 3 different examples, but most of the numbers are gonna be the same at the top. So before their last fair return rent increase was approved, their profit was $900,000, and then they got the rent increase approved by the board, which gave them an additional $154,000 per year. So that put their profit at 1.1 million, we'll say. And so we want to make sure that they still have that profit today, but we have to adjust it for inflation. So then we look at how much has inflation gone up between the base year and the current year. In this case, it was 3.24%. So we multiply that times our 1 million, and that gives us how much we have to increase their profit in order to account for inflation. So that's the $34,000 number. And you do the same thing. You divide by 419 spaces, divide by 12 months, and that gets to $6.85. That's how much you'd have to increase the rents to cover the inflation. So the reason why we have 3 columns is because this is where the board can make a decision. You can decide whether to pass through 100% of inflation or 75% of inflation or 50% of inflation. And that's what those different columns are doing. That's the only change. So now it's like, put it all together and what do you get? And so you add up those same numbers that we saw before. Remember I told you you'd see them again, $18.58. So that's how much of a rent increase you need to cover all their operating expenses, not accounting for mortgage. And then you have to add $33 for a rent increase to cover the mortgage. And then you have to add either $6.85, $5.14, or $3.43 to account for inflation, depending on how much inflation you want to pass through. And that's how we come up with our numbers for gross profit maintenance. So that's the formula. Any questions on that?
Excellent, Dominique. I use Siri.
We've been doing these a long time. Okay, so that's the gross profit maintenance. So normally we don't normally recommend gross profit maintenance. And the reason is because it includes that second number, the $33 for the mortgage interest. So what courts have found, what experts have found, and it's held up in court, is that it doesn't really make sense to include in a rent increase how much the park owner is paying for their mortgage. Because because if that were the case, if one park doesn't have a mortgage because they paid it off, their residents are going to be paying a lot less than the park across the street that does have a mortgage. And it has nothing to do with the quality of life in either park. It's just whether the owner used debt or not. And if we allowed that, that would actually incentivize park owners to kind of play with their mortgage, to refinance or to pay it off right after they get their rent increase approved by the board. So we just don't want to deal with it at all. And the courts have agreed that it's not really fair to include that. So the MNOI methodology, which again stands for maintenance of net operating income, it's net because it's net of the mortgage interest. So it's exactly the same calculation as the gross profit maintenance. So all these numbers are exactly the same, the $18.58, exactly the same. We just skip over the mortgage interest. So then the next step is just the inflation part, and then you're just adding those two components. So it's exactly the same numbers minus that mortgage interest line. So it results in lower rent increases if the park has a mortgage. If the park does not have a mortgage, both calculations are going to yield the same exact results. So typically, we as staff recommend the MNOI calculation because it has held up in courts as a fair way to approve rent increases under rent control programs. So that's usually what we recommend, spoiler alert, but you all can decide to do something or discuss doing something differently. Okay, so now some points to remember with fair returns. So the city's application can be included in the reimbursement request, just like with the capital improvements. So the way that we do that is we just tack on the application fee to the expenses for that calendar year. So for example, the park that is about, the hearing that's coming up, the application fee was paid in 2024 because they applied in June 2024, but we're going to tack it onto their 2023 expenses, and that's how it gets passed through to the residents. The second note is that depreciation is not considered an allowable expense. So like was mentioned earlier, we are not the IRS. We are not looking at these expenses as the IRS would. So while depreciation counts for income taxes, it doesn't in this context. We're only looking at cash expenses, which is not depreciation. And then to Tom's point earlier, sometimes residents will say, well, let's look at their income tax returns to see how much they really made. And we are not the IRS, so we do not have that authority. We don't ask them for that. And so that's just an irrelevant point. And then finally, we do review the costs for reasonableness. So one thing we'll do is if a specific line item has jumped or gone down significantly between the base year and the current year, we ask the owner about that. So one example of this is there was a park where the accounting expenses increased, they shot up in the current year, and we asked them why, and it was because they had switched to a new accounting system. So there were a lot of one-time expenses associated with switching to the new accounting system, and in future years, it would go back down. So instead of charging the residents or recommending that the residents be charged a higher rent increase because that expense shot up, we instead took a 3-year average of the last 3 years' accounting expenses, and we used that in the calculation. So that's if it's just one line item that has changed a lot. If a lot of line items are changing a lot, then we might take a 3-year average for the MNOI calculation as well. So normally in the MNOI calculation, we compare the current year to the base year. But if we're seeing a lot of irregularities and a lot of line items, then we'll compare the base year to the last 3 years' expenses. And that's how we kind of even it out. It pretty much only works when their last fair return rent increase was over 3 years ago, because otherwise it kind of messes up the average. But it's an option that we can look at and present to the board if need be. Any questions on fair return applications? Okay, I'm gonna hand it back to Tara for our last section on public hearings.
I just want to say that Dominique makes math look really fun.
Yes, she does.
It's so simple. So easy. So this last section, we're going to talk a little bit more about the public hearings and how public hearings are conducted. You've heard us mention some of these things before, but we really want to make sure that you guys understand the process, what to do, what not to do, and what to expect. So you'll be hearing us kind of repeat some similar messages along the way. So we've mentioned throughout the presentation that we prepare a staff report. So that staff report comes to you pretty much 5 days before the hearing. There is not a ton of wiggle room in the time limits in the ordinance. So as Dominique mentioned, we do email those out and we mail them out, or you can come pick them up at City Hall. Those staff reports provide background on the application. It actually includes the application that was submitted by the applicant. So not only do we prepare our brief staff report, but the packet you get has all of the backup information as well. It does not include each expense line item unless there was something funky that we want to make sure you have eyes on, but you are always welcome to contact staff and look at anything you would like. Also included in the staff report is, changes of park income and expenses and profit. You've heard us say that we scour and scrub. If you talk to any one of the park owners, they will definitely tell you that we scour and scrub, and there's usually 2 to 3 incomplete letters in the process of us making sure that everything has been evaluated. Sometimes things go up, sometimes things go down. We do it very impartially. We just want to make sure that the numbers and the data are accurate because, as we've mentioned, anything that's decided now becomes the base year for the next application. We include an analysis of all 11 factors. The staff report actually literally says factor 1, has a description of what that is, and then our analysis on that factor. We also include in there a summary of the residents' written comments. So the staff report has a summary, but again, in the entire packet, there is an exhibit with the actual letters that are submitted by the residents. And we do try to call out and note in some cases, some of you may recall, we may have one letter where, I think there was one where there was like 100 people signed on to like one letter. So we'll call that out and say, there's a letter in there, but the 160 people signed, because sometimes board members in the past have counted the number of letters. You might see 5 letters, but it's actually 200 people that have signed on to that. So we just try to pull that information out for you and then pull out the items that you can actually deliberate on. Like I mentioned, oftentimes in those letters, they do speak about financial hardship, which I think we're sympathetic to, but in the case of a fair return application in particular, it's not something that we can consider because it's not one of the 11 factors. And then we do have our staff recommendation to the board. That's right up front and center on the front page. It'll have a summary of what the applicant is requesting, and then right below that, a summary of what we're recommending. As Mr. Valdez pointed out, you guys can choose that recommendation or any range there within, but we do provide a recommendation based on our analysis. I would say our batting average, I don't know, I'm not good at batting averages, so I'm going to use a different analogy. I know sports, but not that great. I would say it's 50-50 on our recommendations. Sometimes we come in as you guys deliberate. Sometimes those things change, and we are ready on the fly a lot of times, and especially with technologies these days, we will hear what you say. Okay, let's recess for 15 minutes. Dom is really good at math. We go calc that, and then Ben helps us update the resolution so that you guys can try to make a decision that same night. In the past, we had more hearings, and so we would try to do it within that 2 weeks. We still have that option, but sometimes because our meetings are few and far between, we try to get everything done in one night if you guys wish.
Excuse me.
Yes.
I just wanted to say on you and your comment right there how Dominic's really good in math. The previous time that you calculated that the tree trimming was 4,000 overdue, and you did very well. Thank you, Dominic.
So those staff reports are very, very important. We also do our own. So staff goes out with an inspector. Dominique and I, as we mentioned, we know a lot of things. We can write reports. We can do some math. But I learned what a GFI was by going with Art at the city. This was years ago, but I did not know what it was and how it was. And he was teaching me about how you have to have them in kitchens and bathrooms. And so we go and check all of those things, and we include it in the staff report as well. So as Mr. King had mentioned when you go to do your inspection of the park, it's really good to have that page handy because you can kind of see what we looked at and then make your own notes as well. So at the public hearing, there are procedures. So Ms. Horton, Chairperson Horton, kind of walked us through some of it a little bit today. Just go through the agenda, and then we get to the actual public hearing part. So it's really, really important that the chairperson say, we are now opening the public hearing because it's a procedural requirement. And at that same time, the chair will ask whether or not the board has visited the park prior to the hearing and describe the hearing procedures. And we remember that when we visit the park, we don't talk to anyone. We can ask to be let in and be shown like places, but we do not conversate with park manager or residents or anyone coming up to you. So after the public hearing is open, legal counsel, in this case, Mr. Jones, will administer the oath to anybody who is providing testimony during the hearing. So the park owner, representative, residents that wish to speak will all be administered an oath. City staff, or that would be either myself or Dominique, will provide oral proof of the public hearing, noticing that we've met all those timelines that we went through on the procedures and the process, and we'll do a brief summary of the staff report. So all of that is read into the public record. So I would say this board might be a little different than some of the other boards and commissions in that there is a kind of two-part process. So there's a testimony portion where the owner comes up first, provides their testimony, they stop, then the residents come up and they provide their testimony. We have in there typically on the agenda that the whole amount of time is 20 minutes per side. The chair can make modifications to those time limits as they see fit. And so then after that testimony is provided, then there's a rebuttal period. So anything that the owner said or that the residents said in the rebuttal period, the owner can come back and say a rebuttal against what the residents may have said in their testimony and vice versa. If the park owner chooses to not participate in the rebuttal portion, then it's done at that point. So I think that is a little bit different than maybe some other boards and commissions. So after the rebuttal period, the board has an opportunity to ask questions of the park owner and of any residents that spoke. After that is all complete, the chair will close the public hearing. And at that point, the board will then deliberate on everything, staff report, testimony received orally at the hearing, and then make findings. I think it's really, 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 really important, and Mr. King had brought it up previously. It says the board makes findings supported by substantial evidence in the record. So again, we are not throwing a dart somewhere. We are basing that on the information that's in your staff report packet and the testimony and information that was presented at the public hearing. So again, another important reason why the residents that were here earlier, we had to let them know what the process is because we can't have any of that into the record.
Yeah, and just to reiterate that, so the rule is the board's decision has to be supported by written findings, and the written findings have to be supported by substantial evidence in the administrative record. So as long as you do that, then when a challenge happens, if a park owner or residents want to challenge the decision, they would bring what's called a writ of mandate, petition for writ of mandate. And the rule for upholding a city decision against a petition for writ of mandate was the decision supported by written findings, and were the written findings supported by substantial evidence in the record? So that's what we're trying to do.
And that written record is the resolution you'll be adopting. So again, that resolution, when it's presented to you the evening of the hearing, will be staff's recommendation. If you decide to go with something different, that is totally fine. We will update math, and then we'll work with legal counsel based on the deliberation to make sure it has those findings in there. Robert's rules. So I would just say if you have interest in being a chair or vice chair, you should become really familiar with Robert's rules. But that's really applies to everybody in general. Robert's rule really apply to the order and kind of behavior of a commission, council, board for conducting meetings. And so, it's rules for parliamentary procedures. Oh, sorry, Ben, I'm stealing your thunder right now. I was ready to go for it, but I realize let me turn this back over to the city attorney. I can stand here.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't even noticing, but go ahead. Yeah. So, no, this is how you conduct your meetings. The Roberts rules. I will show you. This is Roberts rules. Roberts rules of order. It's about as thick as, I don't know, a Bible. So that's all Roberts rules. So there's no way to actually know, and a lot of it is not relevant and does not apply. It's meant for like the English Parliament. Like it's huge bodies that it's very complicated, but a lot of it, the fundamental concepts though, are very helpful. So you don't need to actually know like everything about Robert's Rules of Order. You just need to know kind of certain basics. And of course, those rules govern the conduct of your meetings. It's how you proceed through your meeting, how you make your decisions, how you move to the next item, how you do all of that stuff. But there is a caveat to the fact that Robert's rules govern your meetings, which is that if your bylaws vary from Robert's rules, you can go by your bylaws. So the one example that comes to mind is under Robert's rules, a majority of the quorum is what is required for a vote to pass. So the quorum being, if you have a 7-member body, you need 4 present to do business. And then under Robert's rules, a majority of the quorum is what's necessary for the vote to pass. So in a 4-person quorum, it would be 3. 3 affirmative votes would pass the motion. But under your bylaws, you have a very specific provision which relates to the fact that this board has at-large members, resident members, and park owner members. So it says that if you have an unbalanced board, it is possible for us to have a board meeting where we have an unbalanced board, which is, for example, 3 at-large board members are present, 2 or 1 resident and no park owners, or 1 park owner, no. So you have an uneven number of park owner representative members and park resident representative members. In that case, the bylaws say that 4 affirmative votes are required to pass a motion no matter what. That's a scenario where, because every parliamentary body can adopt its own bylaws, and that those can kind of prevail over Robert's rules. So in this case, the Mobile Home Rent Review Board has adopted its own bylaws, and that particular provision would supersede over Robert's rules. The other thing to know about Robert's rules is failure to follow them normally is harmless. It's normally not something that would invalidate the board's actions unless the violation of Robert's rules was so severe or was of such a nature that you deprive the applicant of their due process, which is they have a right coming before the board on a rent increase application to like meaningful notice, like a appropriate notice, and then a meaningful opportunity to be heard. So if the defect in the proceedings was so severe that it deprived them of a meaningful opportunity to be heard, then that would be a due process violation. But a technical violation of Robert's rules is not going to invalidate the board's action. So that's why when we follow Robert's rules, we can follow them from a perspective of let's make it make sense. Let's use it in a way that makes the proceedings go smoothly. Everything goes through the chair. For example, one of the principles under Robert's rules is the chair is the presiding officer. So that's to make the proceedings go smoothly, because when a board member wants to speak, they first get the floor from the chair. They don't speak across the chair to each other back and forth. And same with the residents. Everything goes through the chair. They're the parliamentary presiding officer. And that's one of the principles of Robert's rules, to make meetings move efficiently, smoothly, clearly. And the chair will go through the agenda and lead the board through each item of the agenda, and then within each item through the discussion. So that's kind of like the general principles of Robert's rules. And then the main thing for this board to know about how to operate in terms of making decisions under Robert's rules is the principle of main motion and then the subsidiary motions. So the main motion is the first motion that's put on the floor that's generally to decide the item. So the most common main motion you would see is you're in a rent increase application hearing. You've completed the hearing. The board has made their deliberations, and one of the board members makes a motion to approve staff's recommendation. So staff's recommendation, for example, the requested rent increase is $90. Staff has recommended, based on following the ordinance and the guidelines, that the correct increase amount is $60. So a board member makes a motion that we approve staff's recommendation to approve a $60 rent increase. That's a main motion on the floor. If no other motion is made, that motion, it's going to require a second. So another board member have to second it, and then there can be discussion, and then there will be a vote. But after that first main motion is on the floor, there can be like a subsidiary motion made that can do something with the main motion, can change the nature of the main motion, and can require action on that subsidiary motion before the main motion can be decided. So the two main types of subsidiary motions that you might see are the motion to amend or the motion to the substitute motion. Board Member King already spoke to the substitute motion earlier in the meeting, earlier in this training session, and the idea is that a motion is made to approve staff's recommendation. If a substitute motion is made to, I don't know, it would be a completely different motion, not just a small change to the motion, but it shouldn't be the opposite. A substitute motion can't be, like, if a board member makes a motion to approve staff's recommendation, another board member can't make a motion that we don't approve staff's recommendation. Like, just a substitute motion on the opposite of the main motion is generally not in order. It can be ruled out of order by the chair. But a substitute motion would be something that's an entirely different motion that would replace the original main motion. And so once that substitute motion is on the floor, if it receives a second, then there can be discussion on the substitute motion. And if the substitute motion is approved, we're done, as Board Member King said, because it has taken the place of the initial motion, and then it has either been approved or denied. If it's approved, we're done. If it's denied, then there's no substitute motion. We go back to the main motion and we decide that. The other scenario to be aware of in terms of a subsidiary type of motion is the motion to amend. So that is more common, I would say, that we could see that here, which would be, the main motion was I moved to approve staff's recommendation, and the motion to amend would be I move, to make a motion to amend the main motion to, yes, we're going to approve staff's recommendation, but we're also going to include this additional bucket. There was an additional bucket of, expenses that we talked about, and I move that we include that additional piece in the motion. So we're going to approve staff's recommendation, but with this additional $1,000 for this particular piece of work that was done. So I moved that we amend, instead of approving, $60 a month, it's going to be $62 or something like that. That could be considered, you could judgment call whether that can be considered a substitute motion or a motion to amend. But at the end of the day, it's a pretty similar process, because you would vote on the motion to amend first. If the motion to amend is approved, then the main motion is deemed amended, and now you have the amended motion on the floor, $62 instead of $60. And then you vote on that amended motion. So in that case, it can be a two-step process, but there's also a shortcut that can be done, which is called the friendly amendment. I know that the tradition of this board is to do the formal motion to amend rather than the friendly amendment, but the friendly amendment would be something like the board member makes the original motion to approve staff's recommendation, it receives a second, and then in discussion it comes up, that there's this little tweak that's needed, and so you just kind of casually say, well, I suggest a friendly amendment to add that additional bucket of $1,000. And you ask the motion maker, are you comfortable with a friendly amendment to include that? They say, yes, I'm comfortable with that. Ask the seconder, they're comfortable with that. Okay, so now we've deemed the motion amended without having to have a formal vote to amend the motion. It's kind of just consensus, and we understand that, okay, friendly amendment, the motion's amended. Now we just go and vote on the main motion instead of having the two-step process. So it's up to the board how formal you want to be. But in the past, and with Chair Roberson, he was a parliamentarian and liked to follow the formal process, and that's his style, and that's fine. But as long as you're doing it in a way that, is clear, everyone, the key is that we understand what the action is being considered and ultimately what action is taken. We need to know exactly what the decision is. So clarity is the key. And it's good to know about Robert's rules, but we want to have a practical approach to it. We can be as formal as we want, but the key is that we, respect due process and respect our rules, our ordinance, our bylaws, and our guidelines, and we make a clear decision. So, yeah, happy to take any questions on that process. That's how you'll go about making your decisions.
I would just add that Mr. Jones is here at all of the meetings. So if there's ever really any questions on process or like, wait, was that a motion or is that a substitution? He is here to kind of guide the board through that process to make sure that we do it properly and are reading things into the record accurately and clearly. You're almost making me think that math might be more simple than Robert's rules. That's a big book.
Believe me, I don't know the vast majority of this book, by the way. I only know the very simple, and that's all you need for the city. I do the planning commission, I've done the city council, I've done this board, and you just need those, certain basics. You don't need to know every detail, yeah.
You don't need the whole book. You just need the bits and pieces that are most relevant to what we're.
Yeah, I'm a fan of like a
voting on.
practical
Yeah.
approach that
Yeah.
doesn't confuse people,
Exactly.
and so that everybody is clear on exactly what action is before them, and rather than wondering, what's the technical thing. The thing is, everybody understands what's being considered before the action is taken, and so it's clear before and then after it's done.
Right, depending on if it's going to be a substitute or either an attachment to the original motion that is before the board.
Yeah, usually, I mean, you can kind of make it a two-step process or a one-step process. It can, and you can also there's a judgment call between, substitute motion and motion to amend sometimes. But there are other features of Robert's rules, like points of order and things of that nature, where you can say, the chair can rule people out of order if they find that a violation. So if they say, for example, to go back to my last point, like if someone makes a motion to approve staff's recommendation and someone else says, I move a substitute motion to not approve staff's recommendation, the chair could rule that out of order because it can't just be the converse of the main motion. And there are other kind of points of order. There are, you could say point of order. I don't know. What are some examples for Board Member King? Like, there are people being loud in the back. We need to stop. Motion to take a recess. Motion to adjourn later. Motion to adjourn by a certain time if we can't finish by then. I don't know if you can think of others that are used commonly.
Well, what I did right at the start of the meeting, a point of order to ask about something to start with, just because it's not in the agenda at that point and it's not part of the procedure, but it's something that we need to decide. Somebody needs to decide it. So that's the only thing I can think of.
And one of the other things to consider is most motions just require the majority vote of the people that are present, the board members that are present and participating. But in some cases, if the nature of the motion is such that it would cut off further democratic debate between the board members, it usually requires a 2/3 vote. So for example, if the board wants to continue discussing, they're not done, right? Like they're still discussing and deliberating over a certain motion, a certain decision, but one board member is saying, we need to be done. I want to be out of here. I'm tired of this discussion. We've already covered it. I don't want to talk about it anymore. They can make a motion to end debate, cut off debate, and move the question.
Yeah.
Which is, let's get to the vote. Let's stop talking about it. Let's stop discussing. Let's stop debating. And in that case, that is something that they have a right to have that voted on, and there's no discussion that's allowed on that type of motion, but it takes a 2/3 vote for that motion to pass because it's kind of cutting off your democratic rights. That's the way I think of it, between the majority rule versus the 2/3 rule. It's like if it's cutting off your democratic rights to kind of go through the decision-making process and speak, then it's going to require a 2/3 vote. And in that case, if that motion carries, then you'd be required to go right to the vote.
But in doing so, isn't it address the chair first that you have a point of order? So all of this really, all of your comments really should be directed to the chair primarily, and then
To get the floor,
yes,
kind
to
of.
get the floor.
Yeah, and
So-
if multiple board members are trying to get the floor,
Mhm.
it's up to the chair to say, okay, we're going to go to board member King first, then we'll go to board
Right,
member Harris,
right.
et cetera.
I believe, isn't that called call the vote? Isn't the term used to the chairperson, I'd like to call the vote?
Yeah, or move the question or call the
Move
question.
Yeah, yeah.
That type of
Then
thing.
there's no deliberating that, it just,
Yeah, there are certain motions under Robert's rules that can't be deliberated on or discussed, and that's one of them. So I'll keep like a Robert's rules cheat sheet with me during the hearings that will say what the voting requirement is on these different kinds of motions and whether they're debatable or not. And that's a handy thing to have. Yeah. I'd be happy to, actually. That would actually be a good idea, especially for the chair to have that. Yeah, handy. Yeah.
Mr. Jones, or should I say Mrs. Chair first? I was wanting to ask something, because when you said call the order, and clarifying that, could it just cut out the discussion if somebody wants to talk about it?
Yeah, if you move the question or ask the chair to call the question, you could either make the motion yourself once you get the floor, or you could kind of ask the chair to do it. Like, chair, can we call the question? If there's kind of a consensus and everyone's done debating, then she'll just do it. But if there's one or more board members who still want to discuss something, then it'll have to go to a vote of the full board. It'll be like a roll call vote, and it'll take 2/3 affirmative vote to majority vote to succeed for the motion to carry. In which case, it would cut off debate. No one else would have the right to debate, and they would have to go to a vote.
Yeah, Mr. King was just clarifying that name, and so we kind of went
Yeah,
backwards. We discussed.
there are a few different kind
Yeah,
of terminologies for it. I've
yeah.
heard move the question, call the question, motion to end debate, motion to, yeah, all those kind of words.
I got a little lost, falling asleep. Or
I'm green. Yes. So as I mentioned, Mr. Jones is here to help us through all of that. And then if, he's going to read the board and might say, hey, you may want to do this, or it seems like so he'll help guide through that process. Because yes, there's lots of terminology and multiple terminology to kind of do the same thing. So we are down to our last 3 slides. So we're getting near the end. Thanks for hanging in here with us. So you've heard us talk a lot about ensuring a fair public hearing. So we have representatives, again, from the park resident side, the park owner side, and members at large. It is the board's responsibility to be a neutral party that is examining the information that's presented before them to make the best decision possible. Based on the information received. And, you have to afford each park owner a fair hearing. So that means that the ordinance and the guidelines must be followed. So please familiarize yourself with those documents so that you can ensure that you're affording that park owner a fair hearing. This is also another very important one that we've talked about a few times. So board members shall not express, I'm going to say it again, the board members shall not express any opinion on the merits of the application that's under consideration prior to the close of the public hearing. So this is really important. I think we have it here on some of these next slides so you can re-say it. But, even if we take a 5-minute recess and you're walking out to use the restroom, again, hello, hi, smile. That's it. You don't want to talk about anything at all that which could, make it seem like you're leaning one way or the other. So again, this has to be a fair process, and so it's really important not to discuss any portion of the application outside of the public hearing. Reiterating again, board findings must be supported by substantial evidence into the record. That record is the resolution that is adopted by the board and all of the public hearing documents and information. I think I'm sounding like a parrot, but some of this stuff is really important, which is why you're hearing us reiterate it over and over. So again, avoiding ex parte communication. So prior to the hearing, board members should not discuss any park issues with residents or owners from that park. And this really should be observed from the time you receive notice that an application was submitted. So you may notice, oh, Dominique, I can't remember because Rancho Dominguez has been going on for a while, but that very first notice where we're notifying residents that application has been submitted, that also gets copied to the board. And so at that point forward, we don't talk about that application until the public hearing. Again, if you have questions regarding any of it, you are welcome to reach out to city staff or the city attorney. We can provide you with information, but you cannot speak with each other or anyone else regarding the matter. And again, just even before, during breaks, or even after the hearings, it's a good idea to not have conversations with park residents or owners. I know sometimes it can be a little tempting after some of us have sat here for like 4 hours or 4.5 hours on some of these hearings to, kind of on your way out, people will come up to you and want to talk about it. But again, it's just a good idea to avoid those discussions about anything related to the park or that public hearing. As Mr. King mentioned, greetings and pleasantries are fine. How are you? How's the dog? How's the kids? Whatever it may be, that's okay. But just be really careful with perception. Sometimes even us as staff will wait until the room clears before we go walk to the parking lot. So not for safety reasons, but just to, for those perception issues. And again, it is really important to maintain neutrality and to give everybody that is speaking before you the same level of respect. So during the hearings, it's asked that board members really limit cell phone usage or maybe even turn it off. You shouldn't be talking on your phone or sitting there, emailing people, or that you're engaged and you're listening to the information that's being presented to you and you're participating in the meeting. You must remain on the dais, so if you ever need a break, you would address the chair and request that a break be given, but you can't just be like, I need to go use the restroom and get up and leave in the middle of a hearing. Yeah, please don't do that. We literally will have to stop everything because it's really important that all the decision makers on the board are hearing all the same information. But we do breaks. You just need to address the chair. I've never seen one not give a break before, so it's usually not a problem. Yes.
Let me ask you a question. I mean, I know we are not the council members, but the council members, they take off and walk away. So do the staff on the floor down here. They go and walk away. So why is it that we cannot, as a mobile home park review board?
That's a Ben question. I'm going to let him answer that.
So technically, it is okay to proceed as long as you have a quorum still. So for the city council, if there are 5 of them, if 3 of them are there, they have a quorum to conduct business so they can proceed. But the city council isn't normally conducting public hearings the way that this board does. So although technically the board could proceed as a matter of having a quorum for purposes of the Brown Act and Robert's rules, it would be okay if a board member were to leave as long as you still had 4 present. since it's a 7-member body. But the issue is, since it's a public hearing, assuming you're in a public hearing, you now have one member who's not receiving the information that's important for the decision that they're going to need to make. So we would want to avoid a situation where a board member leaves for a large portion of the hearing and then comes back and makes a vote on it because they didn't hear all the relevant information. And in the Zoom context, when we had the meetings on Zoom because of the pandemic, there's actually a specific rule there that says if anyone gets cut off due to the technology, then you have to stop everything.
And if I can, Madam Chair and Mr. Jones, isn't there a quorum etiquette that the board has to maintain at all times during public hearing?
An etiquette, just
Yes.
I mean, yeah, there's a certain etiquette. Oh, there are rules of decorum, if that's what you're
Yes,
referring to.
yes, yes.
Yeah, so that's something we can touch on real quick. The city council has adopted rules of decorum that apply to all public meetings in the city, and I have a copy handy right here, just to give you an example. It's more for controlling the crowd, as well as the behavior of the board members and everyone in the room. So I'm opening it right now just to give you a sample. It's pretty short. No person attending a public meeting shall engage in disorderly or boisterous conduct that disturbs, disrupts, or otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of the meeting. All remarks by members of the public shall be addressed to the mayor or the chair and not to any other member of the public or to any single council, board, or commission member unless in response to a question from that member. Signs, placards, banners, or other similar items shall not be permitted in the audience during a public meeting if the presence of the item disturbs, disrupts, or otherwise impedes the orderly conduct of the meeting. All persons attending a public meeting shall remain seated in the seats provided unless addressing the body at the podium or entering or leaving the meeting. All persons attending a public meeting shall obey any lawful order of the presiding officer to enforce the rules of decorum. So if someone, the main takeaway point is if someone's conduct rises to the level of actually disrupting or disturbing the meeting so that you're not able to really proceed with the business of the board, they can be removed from the chambers. And the chair can stop the meeting and say, get that person out of here, and hopefully we have sheriff or something that can take them out. But if someone, for example, just is criticizing the board, gets up at the podium, they don't like what the board's doing, they're giving public comment, they may even curse at a board member. They may even, criticize a board member, criticize the board as a whole, criticize the city. They're allowed to do that. That's within their democratic rights. It's only when it rises to the level of actually disrupting or disturbing the meeting that they can be removed.
I just want to make a comment. City has informed me that going forward, I think all of the commissions and boards and all of the agendas will be the same and will include the rules of decorum on the front page like City Council has adopted.
I can't hear
Miss
you.
Solis, sorry, Miss Solis, your voice is really soft, so we can't really hear you.
Is that better? Yeah.
You actually really have to speak in there.
Okay, so I was informed that the committees, boards will be including the rules of decorum, just as the city council has provided on their agenda. So we're in a transition period with the new system, and they will be included on the face of the agenda.
So that all the members of the public and the board will see all the rules of decorum right there when they enter the meeting. It'll be right at the top of the agenda, so everyone knows what the rules are.
Yes, because I believe, sorry. But yes, I've seen a couple meetings and I see them on Zoom. And I've seen them recently where somebody actually had a disorderly conduct and was removed. And that person constantly is always in here, attacking the council, which I think we all find that inappropriate. I mean, it sounds personal and it should be taken somewhere else and not here. So being that said, I guess now you have sheriffs. Is that why they're here now?
We have sheriffs, we have security present. We have it. You'll notice the dais area has locks, keypads locking the restricted area. So we have security measures in place to ensure that no member of the public can come into the restricted area. And if there's a violation of rules of decorum, it's more up to the chair to kind of control the meeting. But if like it becomes a situation where a person is refusing to leave and they're disrupting the meeting, then they can be forcibly removed by the sheriff.
So, Ben, does that also include anybody, for any person here on the board being maybe threatened or anything like that during any meeting, that they would be removed, right?
Yeah, if their conduct
For their
was was disrupting the meeting and was violating the rules of decorum, then they could be removed. But normally it would be a situation where we all know each other, we work together. The chair should be able to ask them, politely multiple times before it comes to that. You kind of try to use, common sense, cooler heads prevail before it, eventually it may escalate to that.
Ben, one last thing. Is it possible that that order of the decorum can be verbalized before our public hearing is held and somebody read it? What you just read in the notes, somebody read it. I have seen some televised informations of agendas and board meetings, and they read the order of conduct.
Yeah, we could do whatever makes the board feel comfortable. We could post, like, tape it on the wall, a huge copy of it. We could put it at the top of the agenda, whatever you want. These are adopted rules of decorum, and they're public. It's publicly available, and we can put it wherever makes the board feel comfortable.
Perfect, perfect.
And I'll say that oftentimes the chair of the meetings with this board will kind of address the audience with cell phone usage and, please don't speak, no cheering, all that type of stuff as well. So, okay, so the board's decision should be based on documentation and testimony given and received at the hearing and not based on board members' personal experiences. So you can't say, man, I was back in that park 3 years ago and this happened, and now you're basing part of your decision on that. You cannot do that. Your decision needs to be based on the information provided during the public hearing. And this is really important, especially because we have representatives from the park resident side, the park owner side, and the members at large, that when you're questioning the individuals that came up to speak at the podium, that you are treating them all the same. So just be really mindful of your tone. Even if you may not have liked the way that somebody maybe said something, everybody needs to be treated with respect, whether or not they are a park owner or a park resident. Not to say that you're looking to ever disrespect anyone, but you just have to be really mindful of your tone and how that is perceived. So address everybody in the same manner and just questioning them to get more information, and try to be careful of like accusatory tones where are not in actual court or attorneys like Mr. Jones or whatever we watch on TV. This isn't Law and Order. You're just trying to get additional information from the park owner or the park resident to kind of clarify something that they maybe said. So try to just be careful of your tone, especially in those accusatory tones. And with that, our very last slide, which doesn't really need a lot of explanation, but we will send this out to you all, but we want to make sure that everybody on the board has contact information. We have Ben here. He's the city attorney. So again, if there's any kind of like legal questions or process questions, Ben can assist with that. Dominique and I review all of the information and prepare the staff reports. And then Sandy, she keeps us in line, makes sure that we are ready for all of our meetings, prepares agendas and minutes and things like that. And she'll be doing the polling for when we have meetings or notifying you all of upcoming meetings. And the four of us all stay in loop together. So we try to stay in contact on any of the questions that come from the board members. But please don't hesitate to reach out, especially once you get that staff report. If you're reading something there and you want to clarifying question, you're welcome to give us a call or email any one of us. I would honestly say email is probably the quickest way to get a response because we're not always all sitting at our desk, but you are welcome to call and we will give you a call back as well. And with that, we are complete unless there's any additional questions.
And we will be responding to in a appropriate amount of time.
Oh, definitely. I'm a consultant, so if I don't, then I don't think I'd have a job. Yeah, we get back to everybody really, really quickly, at least 24 or 48 hours. But if there's a hearing, then we'll get back to you like that day because we are on high alert during that point for any questions.
Are there any more questions?
Yeah,
I don't have a question, but it's something that I think we need to pay attention to in the staff report, especially for those who are maybe new members or not familiar with it. It is in the staff report, there will be an area where the staff lays out reasons for either deleting or adding expenses to the application. And that's important because you might hear something from a park owner, the applicant, or some of the residents addressing some of those things. And if you don't read this ahead of time, then you're kind of, saying, oh, well, that kind of makes sense. But if you read the staff report, they'll tell you the reason they deleted a certain expense. And sometimes it's because it's in the wrong category. They'll delete it one place and add it in somewhere else. But that's kind of important to know. One other thing is in the actual hearing, the rebuttal is not an invitation to give new testimony. And so after the original owner's testimony and the resident's testimony, if the owner chooses to rebut something that a resident said, that's not a time for them to give new testimony. And if they do rebut, then the resident's rebuttal is only a rebut to the rebuttal. Again, it's not new testimony. And in the past, there's been times where a park owner or their representative have chosen not to give any rebuttal, but the residents want to get up and tell us more. Well, because you're only rebutting the rebuttal, there's nothing to rebut. So that's kind of important to remember too.
just one other item for myself, something that I learned is when the park owner or the resident or the attorney get up and speak, make sure you write their name down so that if you have some questions you want to have for them, you want to make sure that you say their name correctly. I had to learn the hard way. Okay.
Okay, thank you. It's so important. At this point of the meeting, I believe we're through with the training. So if there are no further questions, now we're going to get to oral communications of each member. So if there are any communications that anyone would like to share, I would just like to say thank you to everyone who came tonight because this is so important. Wait till you actually go through a meeting and see how important it is to those people out there who are listening and watching every one of us to see how we are interpreting what they're saying and if we have any, which way we're leaning on their decisions and how it's going to affect them. And so it's so important that you do read all of this and follow what they have presented. And thank you to Sandy for doing this beautiful job on this training manual. And we look forward to Dominique's, I guess both of you, all of you, all of the contact information and all of the slides that we can use also. But it's so important to be here for all of them, and you play a big role just by being here and deciding their future and their monies. It's very, very important. So thank you to all of you for joining and being appointed to be here. We have so many new people now, and it's wonderful to see that everyone's still involved and very involved in the city here. Anybody else would like to comment? I'm sure you would like to comment on the fact that Come on.
I just going to say thank you, everyone, and good night.
Oh, I'm just teasing you. You know, you've been teasing me all night about having been put into this position.
I just like to say thank you for being appointed to this position. Sandy and I have been communicating. Dominique, I spoke to some time back. Tyra, I think you guys are an excellent team. Mr. Ben Jones, great legal representation. I have a little legal credentials under my belt, but I think it is so important that we be able to address the needs, as Madam Chair said, of these people that are coming forth with their concerns with regard to the mobile homes and rent increases, as well as with the owners as well, because it is a situation that is an issue. And I do attend city council meetings on a regular. I met Mayor in 2021 or something like that, and I've been coming ever since. And I have seen the issues that arise, and they are really reaching out. And like you said, Madam Chair, they're looking at us saying, what are you going to do to help us? And so we have to have compassion as well as be within compliance, as Tom said, according to the Brown Act, as well as the rules. And I think that will take this board and this commission a long way.
I would just like to say, Dominique, you are incredible. I mean, the numbers that you come up with and the calculations that you work on with Tara and everybody involved. It's just amazing. But you are phenomenal, and to put these books together with all of these figures that you come up with it's really amazing to see.
I'd like to add my 2 cents in here. I came in during the COVID time, so I never got to meet any of you, but I'd hear your voices or see you on the Zoom. And so I was going to say, Dominique, Sandy, Tara, and Mr. Jones, you guys made it very interesting. You know, I could see that none of us fell asleep or got sleepy. And it's very, like you were saying, it's very important for, as they're looking at us. I've been at only a few council meetings, and those can be pretty grueling. But everybody was really interested, and because I'm sitting over here and I can see everybody. But you four, really over the top. You're so knowledgeable, but you made it fun. And I hate math, but you made it. You really made it fun. I swear, Dominique, you were really. I was really engaging, listening to you, and I liked it. Maybe you can teach me some things later on. But anyways, and Tara, you made it fun because you added your little jokes in there, and Sandy's been keeping in touch with me. And Robert's Rules, I was president of Carson Women's Club. When I had to do Robert's Rules, I hated it. So, yeah, and I was president for 3 years. I was the COVID president of Carson Women's Club. So I'm really glad to be part of this group.
It's impressive.
Thank
We're
you.
happy to have you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Doctor?
Yes, I just want to thank all of you. I've been around for a little bit, and I have watched a lot of hearings and been to a lot of hearings. And I would say that the first thing came to my mind, Dominique, as you was explaining, was the acronym KISS. Keep it simple. It was so elementary that it was really easy to grasp for myself. So but all of you, I thank you. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I think if we have no other comments, we're going to move on to staff's oral communication.
I'll keep this short. Thank you for all the love and the accolades. We appreciate that. A lot of work goes into these, that you will see. So you've heard us mention before, we are anticipating an upcoming hearing by the end of the year, so keep an eye out for that. It's seeming like it will be in December, our first meeting in December. So the meetings are second and fourth Wednesday of every month. So I don't have my calendar in front of me. I should have looked before. That would be December 11th, would be our the first meeting. So that's when we're right now tentatively thinking that would be, because we're getting very, very close to deeming that application complete. So If you already know that December 11th does not work for you, please let Sandy know because she will have the job again of trying to make sure we have enough board members for a quorum. And then I just wanted to mention.
Question.
Yes.
I'm going to forget. So December 11th is affirmative date for this?
It's a tentative date. As of right now, it's just a heads up date, but once it's confirmed, we let you know and it will be affirmative. But just wanted to give you a little heads up that we're anticipating that it will be December 11th at this point. And then the second thing that I just wanted to mention that in the as much as you love both Dominique and I, when there are future trainings, it'll probably be both of us. But in the future, it will likely be one of us at the hearings. But any communication that you send, Dominique and I are in cahoots with everything throughout the entire process. But at the meetings, it will be one of the two of us. And that is it.
Hi, I just wanted to, first of all, thank you to Tara and Dominique and Ben for having me, welcoming me. And I wanted to thank interim chair and all the board members for your responsiveness to all of my communications. I appreciate it. And if you ever have any questions for me or comments or anything that you want me to convey, please feel free to email me or you can reach me by my phone number that's on my email as well. And I can give it to you now if you need to. But thank you.
Okay, I think that means we can adjourn this meeting. Thank you
Oh,
so much, everyone.
One last thing. One last thing.
Yes.
Do you need a signature? I didn't sign.
Thanks, everyone.